welcome to another fantastic live stream. So you brought up an interesting theory mentioning the Cupo Hell Rider thing. Matt,
I'm serious, Jet. There's no point in doing this.
what did you think of his like Hell Rider Cupo theory?
It wasn't even Hell Rider Cupo.
It was not?
No.
Oh, it was Hell Rider Bruiser. Because Bruiser can track you through darkness and Hell Rider's like after you. Do you think he would do that? For like the track dog thing? Do you think he would do that, Memer?
Matt, I hope you have a good night. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I said thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Jet, I am serious.
We can do like a 4-minute like theory video.
I kind of feel like we should preserve hanging out with Matt over.
I mean, it would just be.
I mean,
like
it would only be
15
for like
minutes of it.
20 or 30 minutes anyway, so it's not like I'm really cutting things short that much.
Well, I mean, you're right that I'd only be able to hang out for like so long. But I mean,
But Matt said he might want to do something else besides Jank Heroes. So
you would want to do like anime or something. Would you be down?
Yeah, that's the problem, is that Aiden wouldn't necessarily be down for anime.
Hmm.
So,
Would you be down for anime?
Oh, I don't mind.
You don't mind? It sounds like Aiden would be down for anime.
I don't even know what I would watch, because the thing I was initially going to try and do was like getting through the arc for No Game No Life and seeing if you liked it, and if not, then we just drop No Game No Life.
Mm-hmm.
But Aiden would have 3 episodes that he hasn't watched.
That is true.
I don't really care.
Aiden says he doesn't really care. Aiden sounds really open-minded and willing to do anything for the hangout.
Don't pawn this on me.
Matt, we were talking about theories, and then as soon as the camera came on, it was like, I don't want to talk about theories anymore.
Yeah, that's because I constantly tell you that I don't like theory videos.
But it was the equivalent of what we were actually doing.
But Jet,
but as a video.
there was not really anywhere that I was going.
What? Bruiser is a hound dog to track you down with Hell Riders.
Jet,
Sounds like a really cool concept.
I'm fairly confident that you're not going to remember this conversation, and that
It's
you're not going to
filmed.
use you're not going to use Bruiser.
Also, the memer. Were you thinking of doing that? Like, getting Bruiser and being like, you'll do whatever I say.
But he doesn't know
Track
about
down
Bruiser's
this guy.
existence. So.
He also doesn't know that you're a Speed Patrol member. But it sounds like if he knew both of those things, he'd be like, cool, I'm going to find Bruiser. I'm going to get him on my team. He's going to track you down. And I'm going to kill you because you're a member of the
But it's a
Speed
good
Patrol.
thing that information is not available.
But if I just talk to one of the speedsters,
Who are bloodthirsted,
but
But
not to
other
me.
for other speedsters.
but like they're not going to just engage in a casual conversation.
I mean,
Why
I feel
not?
like I'm kind of the person who like.
You'd have to control them to be like, hey, talk to me.
I mean, worst comes to worst, I would.
Yeah, he's already like put control over it. And
I mean-
Constructs just sounds nice.
Yeah.
Yes, they tried to kill him, and he
I
said,
might
"Hey
just-
guys."
I might just go and see Contract and be like, hey, what's going on?
Yeah, you already said that you would want to go to hell to go see like Shadow.
Yeah.
So then you could just have a conversation with Constructs. That'd pretty much be the thing. It feels less like a theory when you look at Memer, and as you say things, he goes, and he's like, yeah.
Like, that's the thing, Judd, is that theory videos are silly because of the fact that more or less, if me or him or Jared, if any of us have an idea of what we want to do, we're more than likely going to will it into existence. I mean, I'm the one who can do it the least, but I can just ignore stuff.
What do you mean you're the one who can do it the least? I feel like you underestimate your power set.
I feel like.
I can't move space-time. I can't control people's minds.
You can literally reach into games and grab items. The end of your last session was like, hold on, I want to get all the items. Can I get just a bunch of powers for free? Because my power lets me just grab items.
I mean, the
that let
problem
me do
also
stuff.
becomes, and here's the biggest thing with that, I need time to develop games.
Because you want to make your own items in a
Yes.
game and then reach in your game portal. Like, Matt's like, my character's not broken. I want to make my character broken. I'm working on it.
Development is better than starting off broken.
But the whole point is that you can develop new things. Like, I make wormholes now, but before I made black holes. I made pocket dimensions now, but before I just made black holes. And I like
I
how
can't
both
combine my
exist.
powers, Jet.
I feel like you just need to
Not
try
without
to
using
combine
way
your
too
powers.
many uses of a power.
One
Well-
thing that would be interesting for your specific power sets, if you were to like open up a portal into a game world and bring like a ton of crazy hard like game characters into
I
a
can't.
darkness
Only
dimension.
items
made
and
it items.
items and weapons.
Well, so then like a crazy big like bomb or just like a destructive force or something that would be like an
That
item.
doesn't. D20 minus D20 damage. It's not worth it.
Right, because it's not like Game Portal itself can deal damage. How much can it deal?
Like 2.
Oh, you made it like a low power.
This is a utility power.
Yeah. I mean, it does let you do stuff.
But you couldn't like take something out of a game and like bring it into darkness and just like have it in.
I mean, I can. I'm doing that with a Z-Saber right now.
Now, can you use the darkness as like? I think I get where you're going.
Yeah.
As like a pocket dimension, like an armory, to where you're like, then I enter a shadow and then I just pull that bitch out.
No, that's not what I was saying. I was gonna say like a trap. Like you have it in a shadow and you just move it around to wherever you go, and then when someone's like, "I got you," you just like throw shit.
Things that are not myself. Like if it's tied to me, that's one thing. But I can't just like put items into darkness and then move those items.
Matt limits himself a lot. So he's like, why is this game so limited? I can only do so many limited
But yeah, what I'm
things."
saying is like with circumstances where I have a few not so overpowered options, you don't let me have those not overpowered options.
What do you mean? That sounds
like shadows being able to merge into darkness freely.
But it's a power to merge. That was pretty incredible.
Did you want instant static?
I didn't know. It didn't.
That's my power. That's my real life power. Instant static.
Just like Jet's real power is to rig dice rolls.
Power number 9, hiding. That was fucking great. But yeah, I feel like because you know how Jank Heroes is, for most people, it's maybe like their second rodeo or their first rodeo. It's like your third rodeo. Just write your powers how you want them.
Jet, I don't like being. That's the thing. This is why I hate Jank Heroes, and this is why I'm probably gonna stop playing once I die. The first time, it's such a broken mess.
But I mean, Aiden, do you feel challenged?
And I'm only real. That's because his power set's good.
No, I'm asking, do you feel challenged?
And plus, Aiden could have handled the situation a lot better than he did.
It's sort of weird. I feel challenged, but I feel like it's challenging in the way that a treadmill is challenging. Like, you're specifically creating your own ability to do things imaginatively, just so that you're able to create something that you know would specifically counter that, because once I say that, you can just be like, oh, here's an exception. So then I have to be like, oh, here's an exception. And then you say, oh, here's an exception. And I say, oh, here's an exception. And that's the game.
The treadmill analogy sounds really interesting, because the way you described it made me think of like a chess game, where it's like, I move my piece, what do you do? And it's like, I move my piece,
that's not what
But
this
it's
game
like
is
the
at all.
same thing. Like, it's not.
Well, the treadmill example I just think is funnier, because I imagine you're walking on the treadmill and you're like, this is nothing. And then I like hit the button to make it go faster, so you like run a little bit faster, and I just keep hitting the fucking
Well, like,
button.
the thing is that it shouldn't be like that. It shouldn't just be exception chasing.
I mean,
I agree with that.
do you feel like the game is fun?
I think it's funny. I don't think it's fun.
I kind of agree with that. I think it's funny, but I feel like there are definitely a lot of things that are not geared toward the player of the game.
Elaborate a little bit more.
Okay, like, you can do things that you want, but like only to a very limited extent. Like, you can create powers, but you can't have more than one comma, but
Or one sentence.
right, or one sentence, but you let even though he hasn't played yet, you let
Him do the
him
semicolon?
do like a whole bunch of semicolons, and like,
Or parentheses, which is what I abused a tiny bit.
oh, okay, I didn't know about that either. I just
He's like,
I
I'm
feel like
learning
there's no growth in the game, which I feel like is a big.
There isn't any growth because you're stagnated. You have your powers, you have your health, you have your uses. You don't grow any further than that.
Aiden.
The most you grow is the number of allies you have, the number of weapons you have, and the number of enemies you've killed. That's it.
We both had a conversation where I was like, it's all about like learning how to use your power smartly.
But there is no smartly, Jet. For instance, I can't merge any of my powers together in a meaningful way.
I feel like you just gotta like think about it more.
Jet, I've got something that lets me summon infinite clones.
Mm-hmm.
Those clones use powers whenever I have them use the powers from their perspective. So if I wanted them to be anywhere efficient, I would have to use way too many powers than what it's actually worth to have them do that. For one-hit clones.
I feel like I already thought of an idea, but I'm not gonna tell you because you should just think of your own ideas.
I feel like and I'm sorry to interrupt, Matt.
No.
I was just gonna say, I feel like my dilemma with it is sort of to go back to the treadmill thing. I feel like it's kind of like whatever the exceptions are or whatever the limits are just sort of based on how you feel you want the game to go explicitly, in the sense that like I'm like, oh, okay, well, if I can do anything and I can use my powers any way I want, so long as it's in a way I describe them, then I want to do something that just like undoes the like continuity. And you're like, oh no.
Well, I don't necessarily agree with doing the continuity.
The continuity thing is only like a clusterfuck. Like, yeah.
And I agree that it hurts other people, and I agree that it's a problem. And
it also could have hurt you too, like the way it went. Yeah.
But if I can choose to use, like, if that's the whole joy of the game, is you can use your powers to do things that you want so long as you wrote them that way, I feel like I should be allowed to make that decision.
Like
it shouldn't be a thing where, like, oh, this is going to mess up how I want it to go, so no, you can't do it.
The thing is that it's not a player problem, it's definitely a you problem, Jeff, because you allowed time manipulation to be a thing.
I mean, it can be, but I mean...
So you actively made it possible to screw up continuity.
Even in original Jank Heroes, there was a guy, I think his name was like Max Maxter or some shit, and when Jared was gonna really fuck up like continuity, Max Maxter would be like, hold the fuck up.
And it's still bad even back then.
But I mean, there's plenty of stuff you can do with time manipulation that doesn't go, well, I guess we're back at episode 5 for like everybody in the game.
But
like
here's the thing,
it's a hard knot.
Like if you're having time manipulation, then of course you're gonna want to go back to resolve a lot of your problems. If you know how things are gonna play out in the future, then going back to the past is the ideal solution.
But you can do that without fucking everything.
But then you're limiting time manipulation, which is theoretically limitless based on what the power was. Either don't have time manipulation or let people go to the full extent.
No, I don't understand why there's no middle ground.
There is no middle ground.
I think the reason, just to grow a little bit beyond that, I think the intersection where a lot of these problems and similar problems come in the game is just because, like, we have to set defined parameters for our powers and, like, laws for ourselves beforehand, but you don't have that. Like, the game doesn't have anything that can't come up or that won't work that we would know beforehand to influence how we play the game. So, like, I didn't know that I can't mess up continuity except for the fact that now you say you just don't like that. So that could be a way that I could have an advantage over other characters. But if you said, oh, in the beginning of the game, before you make your character, just know you can't mess up continuity. If you have time powers, you can't mess up continuity. If you want to make your things, you can only make them more. Like, I feel like there are certain things that if you want it to go a certain way as the DM, as the game master, you should have an obligation to your players before they play to let them know these are things that we've just all agreed are a standard part of the game that aren't going to change. So, like, you can move, but within this space that's well defined.
Well, Plain White, like, did the whole call-out. Like, part of Plain White's existence is to be like a self-insert. For one, it wasn't like you used the power, and then I said, oh, it doesn't work, and then Plain White goes, and because it was like, hey, real quick before you do that, I don't want you to fuck up and lose your thing.
But Plain White's an insert in the game. I mean, before you join the game, before you make your character, like, have a thing that you yourself have written out that says, these are the rules.
But it doesn't have to find rules, is the problem.
Well, there's, like, for me, there's no, like, real purpose to have that. Like, I feel like if you went back and you, like,
rules, but inadvertently.
Because you could have done the undo, right? Like, you could have still done it, and I would have just, like, had to try to play with it. Like, I would have had to try to figure it out and see how bad the shift would be, or try and make it where there wasn't a shift or something. Like, but at the same time, it's not that you can't do, like, a continuity shift. It's just I would heavily prefer that you do
But
not.
here's the thing, now you're guilting your players. You're guilting your players into being like, I'm gonna have to do all this work.
That's not really a problem.
It
You
is a
literally
problem,
were
Jeff.
like, you could go from one extreme or you could go for the other extreme, and you were like, no middle ground.
There is no middle ground.
I'm giving him the ability to do it, but I'm telling him if you do it, you end up
You're
fucking
still-
everybody. Like,
yeah, there's still
everybody's screwed.
that's still an extreme, Jet.
But you were okay with extremes. You're like, make it one or the other.
Yeah.
So what are you upset about?
Then
It's
don't,
the extreme.
okay, don't warn people then.
Plain White wouldn't want all his like history rewritten.
Don't have it self-insert, Jet.
He already exists.
So then my whole thing is like, if I would have done that, would you just have done like a Mad Maxter or Mad Max Maxter thing?
Max
where,
Maxter?
Yeah, where it's just like, oh, but there's somebody who's more powerful than that who just undoes it anytime you try and go beyond a limit that I don't like.
You might have had like a story adventure with Max Maxter where in the end like it doesn't fully shift, but you still have like a fun little romp, and like he's
But
like,
that's-
I'm gonna try and like time janitor it. So
But
you
that's the
could have
thing. Could I
ended up.
just kill him and be like, okay, so now I'm gonna, or oh, I'll just take over his mind. So now I'm gonna go all the way back to the beginning, collect all the jewels, and just win from day one.
And see, you let that happen, and then that's completely feasible. And this is why you put regulations on things, Chet.
I mean, you'd have to see what happened. Like if you tried to like.
But then
take
if I
over
did
a
that,
character,
would
but-
you have been like, oh, he's secretly part of a bigger thing that can't be controlled with like normal powers? Because like,
And
You'd
that's
have
the
to
other
see.
thing, Jed, is that you'll just introduce things and you are essentially saying adapt or die. If you
Yeah.
don't adapt to what we're doing, then you're dead. It's like how you did with the Crystal Dimension. It's actually screwed Jared.
Jank Heroes, this whole thing is like player interaction with like game master, and it is reaction based. It is very much
But
so
like
how
Jed,
play
you
around the
introduced a
launch.
whole concept and it screwed over a lot of people who had the old system of powers where they weren't limited by the crystals. And most of them died. The only one who didn't was Modeste, and that's purely because of what his power set was and how it translated.
but I feel like that's the whole thing. Like if this whole game, if you as the game master are putting us in a maze, and you're defining things for the maze, you never like, and our whole thing is to try and jump out of the maze and win the game. The whole thing is you don't ever like define things for us to understand that.
You keep
Like,
changing the maze on
right.
us.
So then whenever we try to get out, you're like, oh, but actually that's not the maze. The maze is like bigger than that. So anytime we try to be like, oh, well, I actually won, then you're like, no, because I don't have any limits on myself that you would know to be able to actually have that are firm for us to be able to check you. You just have ways to check us.
Well, like the whole Jank Heroes is heavily inspired by like comic books, right? And comic books run from like 1939 continuity. You actually fixed the shot. 1939 continuity for like Superman to like now in like 2018. Like years of continuity.
But
And the idea is that like that's all comic books do. There's not gonna be a Superman book that's like it's all over. There's no more Superman stuff.
But that's, I feel like, a
But
big
that's
thing
more
about
about having specific adventures tied within it. Like a lot of I'm not gonna say a lot because I don't read comics, but like I would say a decent amount of comics don't necessarily call back on previous things, especially when you think about things like the reboot.
Okay.
My whole thing,
I
before we get
have
into
a
like
whole thing on
comics,
that. Yeah.
before we get into comics, my whole thing, I feel like that's the difference between like a story and a game. Like games should have stories in them and should have plot and things like that. So I understand that and continuity, and I understand the reason for these things. The difficulty I feel like though, when you have a comic, it's just the writer. The writer decides how the characters are going to
And you
interact
enjoy
and
the
what
story.
they do. Right. So then the characters aren't going to do things that fuck the story. Like you wouldn't write into your story the character, like on page 1, the character falls downstairs and dies, because then you wouldn't have more of a story unless the story is about other things besides that character. But for a game, there's sort of the purpose of like pleasing the person who's playing the game over the person who made the game, which I feel like sort of becomes a little bit.
Well, I
of
feel like that's
difficult
more of a
thing.
balancing act than specifically pleasing the player, but there is still pleasing the player.
So
I
like,
feel like, oh, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, my question is, at what point does it become that you're sort of making the people who play the game unhappy or unable to adapt to keep this idea that you have about it?
So I feel like the same issue is still like in the comic book scenario. For one, and I'm gonna use DC as an example simply because I know a lot about DC. Jeff Johns is like the big editor at DC. So whenever someone has an idea for like, I want to do this with Batman, they like run it by Jeff Johns. And the way they do that is Jeff Johns gets like each writer in a room, they like have this big ass board, and it's like, I want you to write like your whole run of Batman essentially on this big ass board, and we're gonna talk about it. And then he gets the next guy in, and they come in, and they go, and then Green Arrow fights Deathstroke, and he goes, no, we're doing Batman versus Deathstroke next year. Fuck that, you can't do it. And it's like, oh, okay, I can't have him fight Deathstroke because Batman's gonna fight Deathstroke, whatever. And they keep going. And Jeff Johns essentially like runs the show. But does he? No, because at the same time, you have like fans, and fans might read the books and maybe like, like, I don't like this. Why isn't Green Arrow fighting fucking Deathstroke? And it's like, Green Arrow should have fought Deathstroke. I don't. We're gonna change it up. The Batman writer, you're no longer doing Batman versus Deathstroke. We're doing Green Arrow versus Deathstroke. That's what people are asking for. But he has to run that by like everybody. Like, it's not just a conversation between the Green Arrow guy and the Batman guy. Now he has to tell everybody, now it's Green Arrow versus Deathstroke, now it's Green Arrow versus Deathstroke, and everyone has to adapt.
Here's the big problem with that.
But the writers in this analogy are like the players. But also the readers in this analogy are the players. And then Jeff Johns is me.
But here's the problem with that. There is a huge distinction between the media of comic books and the media of games, with the main thing being the level of interactivity between the two. You can have your readers and you can have your writers, or it's more so the readers than the writers, because the writers have more of a direct role, whereas the readers have more of an indirect role. But because it ultimately flows through the editor, it's essentially the editor has the main control over it. The writers have secondary control and are fairly direct, and then the readers are very indirect. Their opinions matter, but it's something where they aren't writers themselves, unless they choose to be writers. So it's not something that they're going to be directly having a hand in. Man, it'd be like, man, I want Green Arrow versus Deathstroke, but it's not going to be like, okay, I'm going to want them to battle in the sun, or I want them to be in a gritty 1960s atmosphere. Whereas in a game where you have interactivity with your players, you have to give them defined rules so that they know what kind of game they're playing and how they're going to go about playing the game. And then you need to entice them with the options that they have within that set of rules, without mixing them up.
To use your Jeff Johns analogy and DC analogy, Jeff Johns runs a company. So if at a certain point, like most, if not all of their fan base says, we're not going to read DC anymore because we just don't like the way it's going. Jeff Johns would be forced by like monetary reasons and not wanting to just leave DC unless he decided to, but for this purpose not to leave DC, to say we're going to do whatever they want in that sense, or at least fix it to where we're both happy. Whereas like
games are still sort of trapped by that a bit, but the difference is that you can have a story premise and have a good story premise in a game, but just be mired by bad gameplay and it ruins the experience. And all you have to do is fix the gameplay and the experience becomes incredible.
But I guess my question is like, at what point for you as the person who creates the game, like if people stopped playing the game, would you then be like, okay, there's a reason for this and I need to change the game? Or would you say this is my game and I'm not going to change it despite the fact that people like are losing interest in it?
So I'll respond to Matt's and then respond to yours. So I noticed that you were like, the problem with the allegory is that players both interact and create the game. But then in the allegory, I was like, the players are like the readers and like the writers.
But
and
it's
I'm
an
like
indirect sense. It's like saying, I like or I dislike. It's not like, I want to have Batman do this instead. Because like individual fans aren't going to have an impact on the story whatsoever. And even if you have like a general consensus of what something's going to do, it's still not going to play out exactly like...
Oh, yes, Scavenger. Welcome. I'm still with you.
It's still not going to play exactly like that. But with a game, as long as you give the players the tools to do like these different options, then they can pretty much experiment with things and do things. And they can even break systems and have an interesting time with that. For example, something that I just recently learned for Breath of the Wild. You can do something called a bow spin. And essentially it's like spinning a heavy weapon and you pull out your arrow and it does more damage, it hits faster and you get more hits faster and you can do really interesting things with it. I actually want to try it out myself, but it's the fact that the game designers gave people tools and they obviously have situations where they can't account for everything, and players can both mess with the tools that they're currently given and mess with the system to the extent that the system exists to get interesting results out of it.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
But it's not the same with DC because of the fact that once you have a story, you have that story.
It's canon.
And it's canon, first of all, so that it can be called upon later by later issues. And then on top of that, you also have the fact that no matter how many readers disagree with something, you can move the comic series into a completely different direction, but it's still not going to match. Like, it's still very limited by what the writers are wanting to write in general, even if they're forced into a situation where they have to write to a certain audience.
So I feel like you're still missing the Scavenger asks, so that way, is it like a Telltale game? I'm not sure exactly what he's reacting to. The idea of like it being like a choice-based thing, kind of, sort of, but I'd say it's way more involved than that. Like I said, it's still like you guys are like writers and readers. Writers have a lot of agency, and when you talk to writers at panels, they'll be like, I wanted to do this Batman story where Batman was in the Old West, and Jeff Johns was like, nah, like you can't do that. Like,
but we
writers
feel very
still
much
have,
more like pure readers than we do writers.
I feel like I don't understand how so. A lot of what you guys do is heavily based on like your choice. And I've played D&D campaigns where like the announcer makes you just like do whatever. He'll be like, oh, we're supposed to go like north in the woods, and you'll be like, oh, I'm gonna go south in the woods, and then he'll be like, you go south, and then you actually go north. You got dizzy and you went the wrong way, so you went.
But that's a bad dungeon master.
Agreed, but notice how like Dr. Evil's doing some shit, and you're like, I'm just gonna keep going. And Dr. Like, I can throw as many things as I want at you guys, but you have so much agency. And I feel like whenever you guys are like, we don't have a lot of agency, I just get really confused. Like, I don't get it.
Dr. Scene, so it doesn't matter what Dr. Scene feels, because Aiden directly controls it.
He's talking about Evilstein. He's talking about like, why does Evilstein? Because he doesn't lack a personality. Like, he's still convincing him to do stuff, but that doesn't mean that he wants to do it. So he still responds like, oh man, why do I have to do the thing?
It doesn't make him a good point if he's directly under control. He's
just convincing him.
But it's more or less direct control.
But it's literally my power is to convince a group or like an individual.
But like with the extent that he can convince people, it's more or less direct control.
I will say this though, because it is specifically convincing. It like when you convince somebody,
someone doesn't fight you. I see what you're saying.
Because they're like, oh, like if I'm like, it's a good idea for you to give me your wallet, and you're convinced by that.
Like, it's a great idea.
So if you're actively complaining about it, you're not convinced.
Right.
Are you just persuaded then? Like, because he still
specifically convinces you, so it becomes your own like forward action. Like if I tell somebody to do something with a convince power, it would seem like from that point on they would be like, this is my thing. Like
they shouldn't
Aren't
sass
there
him
still
back.
levels of convincing though? You can be convinced enough to do something, but not necessarily feel like it's a good idea.
If you can convince people to suicide themselves, then it's pretty strong convincing.
But that doesn't mean that they have to like it. Like, I feel like
they
you could convince
like
me to do something I don't want to do, and I still be like, I'm gonna do it, but I don't really want to do it.
But at the same time, like, using my thing to get people like bloodlusted and stuff, that becomes their own agency. They're like, this is what I need to do for themselves. It's not like them like, are you sure I want to kill him? Like, are you like? It's
I mean, they'll still do it regardless. Let's see. Scavenger says, sounds dope though. He says, sounds complicated. Then he said, Asian persuasion?
Yes.
So all we're saying is have firm rules in your game so that you can't run into situations where players get screwed over by situations that aren't fully capable of being controlled.
for like a game like this, I just feel like that's not like an acceptable condition.
Well, then don't make a game like this.
But I love this, like,
But-
I like the idea.
But like Jet, I'm
you
gonna
guys
drop,
are able to do so many things.
But Jet,
and
I'm
whenever
gonna tell
you're
you
like,
right
I
now
don't
that
know how
once
to
I
do
die, I
things,
will
I don't
drop
get it.
definitively.
I mean, you've said that before.
But
And this is your third playthrough of Jank Heroes.
But this is my first one with this Jank Heroes.
Mm-hmm.
And I got upset to the point where I made a different Jank Heroes.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the idea of Jank Heroes, and I think Jank Heroes is a fun game.
I think
My
as a base
one-
concept it's fine.
My one problem with it, though, I wish, sort of like we were talking about, there was defined things, even if it wasn't like.
You can
Completely.
restrict your players without making them feel restricted.
And I mean, I definitely understand the player restriction, but I feel like there's a lack of restriction on your part, which is my whole thing. Like, I wish there was something that you would tell people before the game, like, you have all these crazy powers and you can do all these different things, so let me just tell you, like, this is the height of whatever. Like, does this thing have a deity? Like, if so, like, this is their control over this. Does this thing have, like, a limit that, like, once you go to a certain point, your powers no longer work, no matter what they are? And, like, what is that limit? So that if people know about that ahead of time, they can design their powers around that to use them effectively. And if it doesn't, then they can just move through and you coming in with something that's like, oh, but actually once you leave the universe, your powers don't work. Then it's like, but you didn't define that.
But that's because a lot of the beauty of Jank Heroes, and Scavenger said the base concept is awesome. A lot of the beauty of Jank Heroes is the idea that it's this world where anything can happen and it's really spontaneous and it changes. And one issue that D&D has is like metagame. The idea that if I read the guidebooks and I understand all the creatures and I understand like what's the best possible build is, if no one stops me from building the best possible build, I just will.
But
and I
that
just will
inadvertently
be good,
happens
and I'll
with this
just
game,
win.
Jet. The more people who play, the more we see movesets being used. And the more we realize that movesets get more and more OP. The fact that people have things where it's like, I do 14 damage, and you're also instantly dead.
I love that. This
Like, nobody would have come up with that right off the bat.
Anthony actually has like no other exposure to Jank. Like, did you show him any videos or anything? Like, no, he came up with that out of it. That's just his thing.
But like now you're gonna have a bunch of copycats.
Not necessarily. There are people who just want to do their own thing. Like Colin was dead set on being a frog, and damn
Or
sure he's a
alternative-
frog. Like,
Or alternatively, when people make a second character and they just make it a better version of their previous character. Like, why would you? It's like,
I have no issue with that.
but like Jet, it's still the fact that if they feel like they're actively being restricted to the point where they're gonna make a whole new character just so that they can do the same things but better, then why? Why have things screwed over that much by dice rolls? Like
The
D&D,
dice rolls are what give you limitations.
right? But the thing is that that's the weakest form of limitations out there, and it's the cheapest form of limitations.
I feel like it's heavy resources.
Because you get one power usage, and then it's like, what am I gonna do? Just make another character, I guess.
Or you can make your one power really good. I feel
Jeff,
like you can work around it.
One power usage.
It could happen.
Jeff.
Scavenger said, you guys want rules? And he said, rules are good, but I thought Remix was for rules. He says, I'm guilty of just making a better version of my first character.
The thing is
I
with
understand.
Remix is that I still can't fully gauge how much people are because the main point with Remix was to take as many of Jet's ideas as possible and try and establish rules and try and make it structured to a point where it was balanced but allowed for jank stuff to happen to the point where like you can develop into the ridiculous stuff that we see on a daily basis with jank heroes. But you have to work on it. And that's where the journey is, and that's where it's interesting.
But that, I kind of agree. I feel like there should at least be, not even the defined rule, but just a definition of what the game is before someone gets into it that says either one, yes, you can do anything to the extent that, like, if all these crazy things are going to happen and things will constantly be getting in your way, then as long as you design your powers to do it, you can always, like, go over the game master. But if there is a defined thing that you're going to constantly get in front of somebody that they can't do, that you know in your head is something that you just don't want people to be able to do, then I feel like you should express that before they make their powers. So that way, it's just a defined thing that like, oh, when this thing happens, nobody's power can go beyond this, no matter what their power is defined as.
Well,
Like,
I
for
know
example,
that
with,
you're
like,
upset
health.
about the undo thing.
Not even that, like with health. Like, someone could totally just have a power where it's like, oh, I restore all my health and like I regain any body parts that myself or anybody else loses. But you
That
can't.
sounds alright. I let
but-
Ryan do a restore health like yesterday.
Like a full health heal, yeah, but
Yeah,
it's still
that's-
not
that's
good.
actually how
It's
this
still
thing
not a
works.
good system. It means that you're never gonna die, theoretically.
Not necessarily.
Like,
Mega
there are
has
very
4
few-
power usages.
Like, Jet, let's put it this way. There are very few ways that you can actively die if you have the ability to fully heal your HP. Like, the
You
only ways
get
would be
all
like
your
to,
matter destroyed. You get sent directly into the sun. You get put into like a space that has like
Jay, you
no
had to fix the
oxygen
sun
and you
part
die.
though. You had to fix the sun part because initially it
The
was
sun
D20.
used to deal a D20 dead. It was so fucking great.
So you could go in the sun and get 1 damage. And
Yeah.
just be there.
Yeah.
And you would keep taking damage each time the D20 was rolled. It was really gross. That also allowed him to live longer. He got sent into the sun.
Mm.
Yeah.
I still didn't like that I was
Scavenger
sent.
said, "Oh, you also were sent by another player. It's not like I was like, I'm throwing you in the sun. Now you're gonna take D20s." It was like,
But
Jared
that
threw
was
you in
also
the
a
sun.
situation where you let a bunch of characters gangbang me.
I mean, it was player agency.
What happened, and I'm gonna probably explain the second death as well for the original Jank Heroes.
Okay.
With the first death, what happened was that I was basically pulling stuff from game rules because that was one of my power sets again from the previous Jank Hero. And eventually these dinosaur-like creatures called the Tribunals, who are basically the space or the dimensional police, even though they're not supposed to be. They're supposed to just protect the crystal dimension, but I guess they also protect dimensions. They were basically like, stop doing that. And so basically you had people who've allied with the Tribunals, and basically most players allied with the Tribunals. But one of the consequences of that is that you're not allowed to push because it hurts the crystal dimension.
Scavenger said, "Try."
And pushing is your whole way of getting more powers. So,
But in this one, you can't push.
This one, there's no pushing. You like start with like.
right.
powers.
Whereas in the original Jank Heroes, you could push for more powers. But essentially what happened was that because most people worked for the Tribunals and I didn't, I eventually got into a situation where I had to do a death bout or a tournament, as Jet put it, even though a tournament didn't make any sense at all for what it was. I got put into a death bout with Jared, or actually no, I think it was Jacob,
Yeah, it might have been Harambe.
or someone you haven't met. But basically, actually no, I think it was Jared because Jared was the one who was screwing.
I think it was Harambe, and Jared just was like, "I'll help." Like a whole bunch of people just like hit him up and said, "I'll also help you
But
do the fight."
here's the biggest thing. Jared was like, if you leave the arena, all of my guys are gonna come in and beat you up. What's the first thing he does? He takes the floor out of the arena and sends me to hell. I'm outside of the arena, fair game, beat him up.
Player agent. They just did things.
Second death, I get put into a coma by a doctor that I actively said, I do not want to go to this doctor, and one of the players was like, I'm just going to take you to the doctor. I'm sure it's fine. I get put into a coma, and I essentially go into like this dream world state, which I was trying to get into for multiple times, and I just kept failing getting into the dream world. I realized that you can only get out if you go through this maze, and you get a specific item. And I had 14 days in the coma because I was like very close to death. I had like 1 health. And this doctor that I was supposed to see that put me into a coma, he heals based on how much damage you have, but the more damage you have, the slower you heal. So because I had only 1 health, I was healing really slow. And so basically I had 14 days in my coma. I sat for 13 days healing because I didn't want to go into this maze that could kill me with 1 health. So I get 13 health.
Well, hold on. I feel like you kind of messed up the story a little bit. You go in the maze initially with like a power set that you didn't understand, and then you got hit, and then you left the maze, and you're like, but I'm healing over a course of days. So then you waited a few days, and then learned how to use your powers, and then on the last day went back in the maze.
Oh, by the way, with regards to that coma state, you can't use any of your normal powers. You have to have specific mind powers that are simply created on a random dime based on Jet's thoughts on it. So I had to figure that out. And it took me a while because I tried a lot of different...
He spent multiple days not doing anything.
I tried a lot of things on the first day and it wasn't working.
You didn't try a lot of things.
I tried a decent amount of things, Jet. Compared to Jet, you just dropped me off at a sandbox saying, hey, figure out what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to randomly be like, oh, energy constructs, of course I can do that.
Scavenger said this sounds awesome. He literally had the power to make anything that he could imagine.
With energy constructs. But why would I think to do that when in my previous power sets were merge into darkness and stuff? Why would I think to have energy constructs? Why would I think that Jet's random power that he handed me was energy constructs?
I'm inside my own mind. I wonder if I can do anything that's based off of using my mind.
I tried a bunch of things that would be imagination based, Jet.
But he couldn't use his own powers?
You can't in that other
but
dimension.
That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, just for the reason that if it's your mind and you can make energy constructs and you can do whatever you want in your own dream, he should be able to use his powers.
But no, I'm limited by what random asset that I had in my dream state. I can't just imagine anything.
In the dream world, you get a new set, and it's not really a dream world. It's a mental dimension thing that connects people's minds and everything.
It's a mental prison that you can access whenever you want once you exit the first time. Granted, or not granted.
Kirby, welcome to the stream.
But keep in mind, I've been trying to get into this 4 or 5 times, and I actually had more than 14 days in the coma. I had 21.
Yeah,
I failed 5 times getting into the coma. So I failed 9 times getting into this dream world state, this mental prison. And when I finally get in, it's oh, you get screwed over in your powers. So I go back into the maze the second time. I finally realize I have the energy construct thing. Then the player that I was with is hey, you've been in this coma for a while. Shouldn't you be dead? And so Jet's you have a 30-minute real-world time limit to get through.
Why would you be dead? You're not
I don't know.
Hospital,
I guess I'm dead because I'm in a coma for so long.
The story part, I couldn't really explain right now. Because I remember at the time there was a reason. But it's just been a minute.
The idea was that, if I...
He was supposed to, wake up.
I was supposed to wake up at the end of,
you can't wake up unless you beat the maze.
But that's...
So
just being in a coma wouldn't kill somebody.
I still was breathing and stuff, Jet. That's the thing.
The issue was, the way the doctor works is you get, put in the coma, and then on the last day you'll wake up from the coma, and you'll be fine. But when you're in, the mental dimension, you can't escape the mental dimension unless you beat the maze. But if you don't beat the maze before you get out of the coma, you die.
Now, let's continue on that. So I start going through the maze, and I'm getting screwed over in time a little. And then I realize that I can just constantly make armor that can just absorb blows. Which, that's fine. Just keep doing that. That takes time, though, because you have to make force fields and armor so that you don't die when you only have 8 health, and you take d20 damage. So I have to keep doing that. So whenever I lose a substantial amount, I have to set up a new set just so that I don't die. And basically, whenever you take out a monster, because every juncture is a monster fight, whenever you take out a monster, you have a d4 chance of finding the item that you need to get out.
There are more dice in the old Jank heroes.
So 1 in 4 chance you get out. Doesn't get better the more you do it. It's always a 1 in 4 chance that you get out. You want to know how many times I rolled 3 out of 4 chances of not getting out? 20 or 30. I died.
Hold on. Kirby said...
I got stuck in a dimension that I thought was going to be perfectly fun to explore, and it ended up screwing me in the worst possible way.
So Kirby said pineapples. Scavenger said Jet is so random that stories are random and just happen. Scavenger said, hey, Kirby. Kirby and Scavenger said they're both not getting notifications. And Scavenger said, don't forget to hit that like button. Thank you kindly. He waited 13 days.
So I wouldn't die, Jet.
But you also ran in the maze without learning your powers. And keep in mind, there's a guide in the mental dimension, telling him things. It's not.
He doesn't tell me what my power is. He's maybe.
They don't know what they are, and they just
Jet,
tell him you should just try and figure out what your powers are.
That guide is essentially my subconscious. I'm surprised that he wouldn't know anything about what I could do.
You didn't even. Yeah, I mean, it's good that you know you have a power. Wouldn't it have been?
I mean, I would assume I would have a power with or without a guide telling me.
You didn't figure it out for a long time. I'm just saying, if you had taken time to figure out what your new
and you can make any decision you want for the length of the game, and you take those things with you. So like if you can build something that gives you an asset, like you can take it with you. If you create something that'll give you like constant healing or whatever, you have that. Like you can just constantly increase your character's thing, but everybody starts off from a 0 point. Everybody has to create in a different way, and everybody can go off whenever they want and do their own thing.
So
to be able
a
to
weird roguelike mix?
Yeah, like it would be like almost Grand Theft Auto where you could build anything and do anything. Like you just be a person like in the day, and you'd be like, how am I going to use my day? I'm going to start building things.
I mean, I will say that starting
things.
as a hero always is a bit weird at times, especially when characters like me or you do a lot of very ambiguous to evil things.
Yeah. I mean, you could just start off like, oh, hey, I'm in an apartment, and I'm gonna like go to school or whatever. If I decide that I'm going to school, and I'm gonna like learn about this specific thing that'll like allow me to build stuff, like a very similar thing to Jank.
Yeah.
But just without the powers initially. Like you would have to gain, if you had a superpower, it would have to be gained through something that you do, and the game wouldn't be necessarily based on superpowers, but just anything you could do.
I do have a solid response to that. I want to read the live chat real quick because there's just been a few messages. Kirby said his new character has light constructs, which is interesting. He just finished making that today. Scavenger said, so this is more of a Jank Heroes rant, but I'm quite interested. He said, so like an OP Sims in response to what you said. Kirby said his new character is actually a combination of 3 different like Kirby-inspired bosses. I actually do have like another RPG game that I've made. But I've yet to have any of you guys play it. It's one of the things where it's like I've published it already, but I haven't like play tested it with anybody. And that whole game is based around.
But you make a lot of RPGs.
I do make a lot of RPGs. There's like a resource system that you use, and the resource system lets you make pretty much anything.
Would you guys play an RPG that I made? Like
Yeah.
I haven't made one, but I'm just saying like something where. Just to not have like the time limit thing, to where like whenever you want to play, you just play for as long as you want, and then when you're done, you just stop.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I'm good.
Yeah, I would play like an RPG you made.
Awesome. I mean, it would just be that.
Yeah. And OmniQuest, I think is what it's called. Pretty much everyone in the game world has like omnikinesis, and with it you can use this resource in order to like make whatever you want, and you can pull the resource like from your environment. So everyone starts off essentially with the ability to create anything, and the only limit to what you create is based off how much resource you use to create it. So you could be like, I make a whole city and my city is like this, but I only spend 1 resource. And essentially, if your city is weaponized in any way, like if it has like tanks or something like built in, like turrets and shit, they can only deal 1 damage because you made it out of 1 resource. But it also means if someone attacked it, then they would only have to deal 1 damage to destroy your whole thing. So the resource amount tells you like how much damage your thing can do,
That's
and it
silly.
tells you like how strong it
City
is.
shouldn't die in 1 hit.
But you made it out of 1 resource, so it's like it has like
It
a
might as well
balanced
be like
reason
a
for how it works.
range shack town or house at that point.
But you can make it look as like verbose as you want and like be as crazy as you want. And the argument against it is just put more resource into it.
But then you kill the environment.
I like the idea of resource, but I also feel like it's just a difficult like game construct to handle. Like I don't know how I would design something like that to be like resource based that's limited like that.
Well, I mean, it's already written. Like there's like a whole book, and I wouldn't be like buy my book on Amazon. I just have it on my computer, and we would just play the game.
I will say, how would you guys, as far as like an idea for an RPG, if it was like the same basic thing that I was saying for a setup, except the fact that instead of just starting out, it's based on like your life to a degree. Like your name in the game is just your name backwards, and like the place that you start out with is like where you're at now, and then you just like move through things.
But it's just like a fictionalized like thing of like your real life.
Yeah, but it's like a different
I mean, it'd be interesting. What is the limitation on things I would build? Would I have to like go to school and get an education, and based on my education, I can like make a thing?
It's yes, but it's based on like whatever you decide to do. So like it's how you spend your time more of. So like time is your resource. If you decide I'm gonna go to class today and you do that, there's certain benefits that you get from it, but it's just based on like the limited schedule of the class. But if you say like, no, fuck it, I want to learn about this specific thing and get really good at it, you could buy like a shit ton of books on it and like spend hours like in your game session or whatever, like reading books on it and like figuring out how to do
It
stuff.
feels oddly visual novel-ish.
Right. Like you would definitely have repercussions for that, and there would definitely be like other things that would happen that would shape how your character is then, but you would have like those different abilities. You'd just be choosing a different path to go on.
I like the idea of the repercussion because they sound, compared to like Jank Heroes repercussions, like really small. Like, you're fucking neat. You don't have a social life. You've just been reading books on construction all
No,
day.
but not only that, it'd be like, oh, so you didn't go to any of your classes, so like you can't register for the next semester, and you're like kicked out of school, and you don't live there anymore. So like now you have to find a place.
You're
to
homeless,
live.
but
And,
you got
like,
all these books on
Yeah, it's
construction, so you build a house out of your books.
It's more or
so
less
you-
just a school life simulator.
But not just that. I mean, it would, I guess, start off like that because that's where we are. But you would go and do whatever you wanted.
I mean, it depends on how fast time's moving.
Or how fast you make time move. Would magic exist in this world? Could you like do stuff like that, or is it heavily like no?
If you learned it, but you'd have to, like, it would have to be an extensive process. Like, it wouldn't just be like, I ran into someone who was magic, or like, I read a book on magic, so now I know that. Like, you'd have to read something, and then it'd be like, or not even read, like, find something, whether it's reading it, whether it's like going out and searching for like a specific thing that you know about or whatever. You'd find something, and then it'd like lead you to other things. Like, you get like baby steps in it. Like, if you got a power or something like that that was magic based, it would be something small, and you'd have to like spend time working with it and like finding people who know about it to like advance it and make it get better.
It's a lot like Jank Heroes Exorcist, which is a version of Jank Heroes that like I've never played with you guys because I thought it would be kind of boring. Like, no offense,
No.
but it was based on Remix, where I was doing a bunch of like interdimensional energy research. I made a game where your powers were based off of like you have to find like scrolls and shit and like actually learn how your shit works, and you have to like keep yourself read up or your powers will like fade. But you also have to make sure you eat, and you got to get a job to get money. Like, I made you kind of like, in order to be to your full potential, you had to make sure that you were like on the up and up in your life. And if you were slacking in any way, it would be like, oh, you don't work a job, so you don't have money, so you can't pay rent, so you can't live in your place. Like, it'll like stack on you, so you just have to like live your life.
And I will say, I definitely like the idea of that, and I feel like that in a game that I would develop would definitely be a part of it. Like, you can choose to do that specifically to nullify a lot of like things that would come against you, like different sort of adverse situations. But you could also choose another route and just try and go for the quickest thing. Like, oh, I'm out of money, I'm gonna just rob a place. And there will be consequences, but like, you've solved a thing, so you can move on. As long as you are able to effectively handle the consequences, then it doesn't matter.
Oh, real quick. Scavenger said, not gonna lie, that sounds like a dope game. He says an OP sim should be a thing. He said, Winslow, would the game take place in college similar to Jank Heroes? Based on what he said, it's more optional. Like, you can choose to make it a college.
It starts out, like it starts out where you are in life. So like, it's not you, it's like a character, but it's where you're starting off. So you can just decide, I'm gonna do like some completely other shit starting now. You can do that.
Scavenger said, or take place at the learning level you are in real life. That's what he said.
Yeah.
So yeah, I should have just read your next thing. And he said, Winslow, this sounds like an OP Sims. I like that he just said that again. He said he made OP capitalized this time, so it's like slight difference.
No, I agree. That's what it would be. Yeah, pretty much.
I have about like 6 more minutes or so before I probably like need to dip,
You
and
have to
hopefully
OP
I don't get cut.
Mhm.
But I actually have been digging like the discussion thing. I'm glad that like it came full like discussion, sit down round table.
Yeah.
But I am like pretty satisfied with like current Jank Heroes. I feel like a lot of things. Scavenger says it needs to be real.
No, I
You
agree.
gotta make.
Whenever you guys would like to play that, I'd be down.
But I feel like
If you would like to play Map. You're like, nah, I'm done with
I don't know.
RPGs. I'm done.
I feel like a lot of the things that I hear that are like downs for Jank Heroes are just things that like make Jank Heroes like better. It's like, oh, you can always just remake your character to make it a better version of your character.
But why is that definitively the way of making things better?
But it doesn't have to be, because you can always string your stuff together as techniques. And you're like, well, what if you can't? Then it sounds like you didn't make the kind of powers
Well, what
you
if you only
actually
have one
want.
power jet?
then it sounds like you can just always make another guy. Like,
But that's, Jet, you're saying that some people are just gonna flat out be bad.
if they decide, like, you still have to, once you make your character, decide, and I'm going to play him. It's not like, oh, you made your thing and you got one power, it looks like you're forced to play this game. You could just be like, oh, I'm just going to make a
But
different
Jet,
guy.
you should
And it's
have
like,
a
oh, cool.
balanced enough system where that kind of stuff doesn't screw people over so that they have to make another character.
The reason why it's not a set system is because the balance scale of the game itself
Doesn't
is
exist.
just adaptation. Yeah. If you had a really weak guy and you were like the only person playing in Jank Heroes, you wouldn't be like, oh fuck, a giant monster is falling out of the sky. I would like have you like deal with things on your level and introduce you to things that can help you be better. But the fact that it is like a continuity and you do have to adapt to what other players do, that does come into effect.
But not everybody likes to be OP, Jet. I don't like to be OP.
But you can't then complain that I'm not OP. You're making the choice to not be OP and then being like, oh man, it sucks
But
that
Jet,
I'm
I
not
shouldn't
OP.
have to be OP to enjoy a game.
But I also agree with that. I don't get
But then I
why
can
you
complain
have
about
issues.
not being OP specifically because of the fact that you're not giving the experience to a non-OP player.
But do you feel like I'm giving the experience in a way to where you can't handle it with your powers? Because I disagree.
More or less, yes, Jet, because like I can escape everything and that's fine and dandy, but escaping everything and actually dealing with things is two completely different scenarios.
But I feel like that's based on your player agency. I feel like you choose not to deal with things and then get upset because you didn't deal with them.
I was just gonna say, a thought for my game. I would think that the interest for me as someone who would be like creating the world or like doing the feedback sort of thing would be like, I wouldn't think I would want to specifically do things that would like put things in the way of people, just in the sense of like you would have your repercussions or whatever, but like I don't think I would be like stacking things against you. I just think you'd do something and it'd be like, oh, that's interesting, and then like continue to like.
I feel like part of the putting things in the way thing, right?
Yeah.
Is just like an inciting action for the story that not only will infect you, but it can stack on and have like higher repercussions for like other people.
But Jet, when you are like, oh hey, Dr. Evil, it's right here. Oh hey, Dr. Evil, he's right here. Oh hey, Dr. Evil, it's right here. You can't just keep putting the same roadblock in the way every time.
But then Dr. Evil became a really fun part of
You
the
mean
end of your
everybody died except for one guy who got used as a meat shield.
But if you go one episode back, Dr. Evil was a big part in like your clone ended up joining, and there was the prison guy, and he had the dead elf girl, and he was really involved. Like a lot of
I
things
could have
can
completely
happen.
ignored Dr. Evil, Jet.
Yes, you could have. Even then, that's what I'm saying. A lot of player.
But like the
agency.
only thing was that, and from a player perspective, I really did nothing on that one. The only difference on that was that it was comedic.
Yeah, you had fun.
But Jet, I've had other situations where I don't do anything. It's absolutely the worst.
But I feel like you can't get mad that you didn't do anything and blame it on anyone but yourself for not doing something. You
Not if-
can't like
But
sit
if I
in
see a
test,
situation as pointless, then what am I gonna do?
then
if
you
you
leave
paint
it
a
like you do
situation-
any other situation in Jank here,
Jet,
right?
if you paint a situation as pointless, as I have no chance of getting away from the situation,
I don't see it as that.
Bruiser.
You could have fought Bruiser. You
I
tried to, and then you punked out. You like
Jet.
Bruiser like tanked what you did, and then you were like, I'm gonna try to not fight him anymore.
Jet, you then told me that you were being like, oh hey, you could have just punched him.
Yeah, you could have fought Bruiser.
And then you explained to me beforehand that Bruiser was basically a version of Hulk from in DC that was even more OP than Hulk.
But he would have just dealt like.
Jet
2
expected
D20s
Jared to
different
fight a
damage.
literal magic god.
I thought he could beat him. Like, I feel like a lot of you guys like will see a challenge and be like, "Oh, there's no way I could do it." And
That's
I'm just-
because you painted like that.
I
Why
don't-
would you ever expect anybody to fight magic god? Why would you ever expect anybody to beat a Hulk that can destroy Superman?
you never know. Well, that's my thing. I always like look at you guys' situations and go, I feel like they can get out of
Then
this.
Jet, maybe you need to be a player in a game and have us lead you around.
I would love to play more remix, and I would love to play your game.
And
You're
not
like
make
you don't
games,
want to.
not make games that are so open-ended that you can just throw OP stuff and expect everybody to handle it.
But that's the joy of the game.
But most of us don't think like that, Jet. At the
So-
very least, me and Jared don't, and we have very different perspectives on things.
So Scavenger said adaptation. Then he said evolve, nigga. And then he said I would fight them all by turning them into mud. And then he said by star 8, but by as in like ridden by. So I don't know what he's saying.
But like having OP abilities that can one-shot things isn't entertaining either.
It is when you know. Like think about One Punch Man if you only had like 5 punches. That sounds actually really interesting.
No, One Punch Man's interesting for the fact of what his story is about.
I mean, true. Like, I'm not saying that's the only thing that's interesting, but if you knew at the start of every episode, if he punches 5 things, he has no more punches that, like, insta one-shot. He has to think whenever he punches, this is one of my last
I don't
punches.
think it would be as interesting, Jed.
But that's why
Because then his life story would take a hit.
I think that's one of the things that I'd like to sort of adapt for my game is that like it's based on whatever you do. So like there's no set defined like this is how many you have. It's like if you're gonna punch something, you could punch something as many times as you wanted. So like you could just keep doing that. But like if you have a gun or something, it's like there's like it depends on how many bullets you had before you like left with your gun or whatever. Or like if you have money, it's like there's a certain amount unless you have like a way to continually get money, and then it's like what is the rate that you continually get money and things like that.
So, I feel like another thing that's like, and Scavenger's like, one punch! So, one thing, original Jank Heroes didn't have like a limited number of power usages. It had like, you can have like 3 modes for every power, a 0, 1, and a 2. For a 0, if you said you used your power, you just did it. For a 1, you had to do a check, and if you succeeded the check, then you successfully did it. But a 0 is like easy, like your power is like working at like its lowest. A 1 is like you're putting some effort in, and then a 2 was something your power can't do. You put like a self-limit on.
Okay.
And then this version of Jank Heroes is like no putting a self-limit on your power. Go as hard as you want, as if everything's a 1, right? But then you only have so many of them you can work with. And I like the resource management aspect. It was really interesting to watch Jared play. Jared, who was someone before who was like, I just keep using my power, right? And seeing him go, but I only have so much. And like working around that.
I mean, Jared also is being a little bit stingy with his powers. Like in circumstances where I'm not dodging everything, I've gotten down to 4 powers.
I still don't remember what you did. Like, what did you do that got you down so low?
Monster.
With the UFOs.
And the UFOs.
You're right, that did.
And I did a lot of work, but my character's a pragmatist. He's not gonna just sit there and needlessly fight if he's already done a lot of work. Like, he took down 8 UFOs and a 200-foot monster, and there were still like 7 UFOs in the sky. Like, there's only so much one man can do. And at the same time, he's going to have some power so that he can survive to help another day.
Also, for like magic and stuff, I think it would be really interesting because I wouldn't want to put like, oh, you can only cast your spell 5 times a day or whatever. It would be more of a thing that like it physically affects you in some way depending on what you're thinking.
Like having a resource like mana is different from having a hard limit of how many times you can do the power.
Yeah, well, I don't know that it'd even be necessarily a mana thing. Like, at first, it might just be like, oh, it, like, over time starts to weaken. So, like, if you use, like, a power, like, in succession, back to back to back, like, it'll be sort of a thing, like, you're just running out of energy. Like, it gets weaker. But then if you continue to try and, like, push past your limit, it would, like, still get stronger if you tried to, like, force it. But you'd, like, start to have health effects or something like that. Like, doing that would allow you to continue forward and wouldn't necessarily stop you. You just have to understand that there's a consequence to it.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like the power usages thing isn't that bad only because, like, that's your limiter. I'm letting you, like, essentially do whatever you want with the power. But if you can only do it so many times, then, like, you just have to be wary of that and know that you're not in, like, a stagnant world. The world doesn't just respond to you. There are other things that are happening that you can respond to. It's like a living world.
What it boils down to is that you have an overpowered ability, say, kill all villains. And
that was in Benson Ultimate Alien. Keep going.
Kill all villains, and you have like 16 uses of the power, or 16 uses of power. Even if you fail some of your checks, you're not going to fail 16 times in a row. Not on D20s, Jed. D4 is different because it's a 1 in 4 chance. D20s is a whole different thing because it's a good versus a bad.
So it's like a 50-50.
I was just gonna say it's interesting, because with the kill all villains thing, I mean, there could always be like workarounds, like my character's technically labeled a hero but does like bad things, so then because he doesn't fit under that, the power wouldn't work for him.
But like you
But
take
still
care of
gotta
a
deal
good
with, like,
amount of the
anti-heroes
challenges.
and
Yeah.
stuff. And you could still have people who developed into villains like afterwards.
But
like
then you
I
use the
wasn't
power
a villain
again.
before, and then you just kill them.
Like you wipe the slate clean essentially, and then you have no challenge because you just wipe the slate clean.
Then you can have like heroes that
So
like
then-
get corrupted, and but you can always use
Just
the
wipe the
power.
slate.
That person doesn't always play too, so it still can like balance out the like other stuff.
But like
Also,
it's
not obvious
silly.
villains are really good. Like something bad's happening, but I can't point a finger is also really interesting. What were you gonna say? Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, like with
someone
something
on-
like a kill all villains thing, it would be more or less the evil intentions, so you don't necessarily have to know. It's like how Aiden doesn't have to know every single person of Dr. Evil in order to convince them.
Mhm.
I don't have to know all the villains in the world. They just have to have a relatively evil intention, and then they're dead.
And then Kirby. Oh fuck! I had a thought and I was gonna say it, and at the same time I wanted to read.
Let me
the
turn
live
everybody
chat.
to mud. I don't have to know specifically all of them. I just need to be able to know the generalistics of what I'm aiming for.
I was just gonna say, my bad. I was just gonna say I'm like interested in my game now. I wanna like.
Yeah, you should definitely do it.
Well, I mean, I don't know that there's much to do. Just like when people would
Or
be ready
down,
to play.
yeah, you're just wet. Kirby said, like turning earth to mud. He said I could turn the sun to mud. Kirby said, please don't. Then Kirby said, no, Scavenger said, mud transformation. Kirby said, power usage is fine if you have enough. How about if someone's power usage amount is 1? That's what Matt brought up.
Then
and
you
I
just make a new
essentially said,
character, and then you
Yeah.
throw out the old character, and you don't play with limitations
you
at all.
can either make a new character or, and this would be your choice, make a really good ass power and
But I
stick
shouldn't
with
have
it.
to be
I actually
punished
would
for
be
that
really
shit.
interested in that, especially if someone was like, my career is I'm like the Springdale old style Western sheriff, and you like had a gun and shit, and you were like, but I got that back pocket power, and you like did cop shit, but you had like one power. Like that sounds really cool. So it all depends on how you play it.
But you're
and you
never
have
gonna be in a
so
situ-
much agency and control
But here's
to
the thing,
form
Jeff.
yourself like that.
Here's the thing though, Jeff. Because of all the different players, and because a lot of people are going to go on the OP spectrum, and because you make things world events, OP people aren't going to be challenged by just random robberies. You know that. So you're just going to make world ending. You just made that slime apocalypse happen. Nobody's going to be able to easily take care of that.
I feel like Cowboy Guy, what he would do is he would have guns, and the slime people would come after him, and he'd shoot them, and he would like try and find people and get them to safety to a shelter, and he'd
then
try to
give them
protect them.
weapons.
Yeah, and he would be like, let's rise up against like the fucking zombie things.
And then they all die because he's only got one power, and it's going to be like insta kill whoever gets hit by this bullet.
That sounds like a kind of lame power. Bullets can
Well,
almost do that on their own.
What would be really cool if he had a power that would allow him to like curve a bullet as long as it has momentum. So like he could
Like
make
Wanted.
yeah. So he could like, but not just
and
like he can
those-
control
like from Guardians of the
yeah.
Galaxy. Yeah.
So he could be like shoot once, kill everything in the room.
But then you take out any sort of threat in the situation.
Yeah.
what?
I mean,
he
that's
could
sort of
fight
been
superpowered things.
But you can, if it's an insta kill that you can order around at free will, then what's challenging about the fight?
I guess the
He
thing
can only
where,
use
like,
it once, and there can be.
But like
more
you can
things.
infinitely move it around.
I guess the thing would be like if it hits something that's strong enough to like absorb the bullet, so it stops the momentum, and then it.
But that
can't
sounds like a
continue
really
to
hard
move.
limit because bullets aren't very strong.
Right. I mean, it would depend on what you fight.
It could
And
definitely.
then Joe would
sit
be
through
like,
multiple
"Oh, I
people's
guess you
heads.
should have made a better power."
You just gotta find a way to work around. That's always
But
the
Jed,
thing in Jank here.
That's the thing. At a certain level of OPness, you start losing challenge, and when you lose challenge, you lose interest.
Do you feel like you've lost challenge?
I've never hit the OP mark, Jet. I've
I
always
feel
been
like-
screwed.
In a
Like-
different game, you would be like hella powerful with your current.
But Jet, the fact that
you're hella powerful now.
But Jet,
Everybody,
it's based on
everybody
a spectrum.
vote to play Winslow's game tonight. Everybody listen.
It's still based on a spectrum because I didn't go full on OP. I'm get the short end of the stick.
But you still have really power, and you tried to make your thing more OP with the like my clones don't use my powers. That would have
But
been
Jet,
really
then
ridiculous.
that becomes a matter of, hey, I don't have rules. Oh wait, I have rules. Don't do
Let's
this.
see. Well, your power max is just a solid rule. You have a max number of powers you can
But
use,
Jet,
and they're all you.
even if
so
we
they all
throw,
use your
even if
power.
we throw out clones being able to use Game Portal, which would allow them to summon items from Game World,
But they can.
or summon clones themselves.
They can.
But Jet, that's the thing. It's silly that they can even do that.
You literally said I can make clones that use my powers, and then you're like, why is this a thing? It's like,
But like, what
what?
I'm saying is, why is it using my powers, Jet?
Because they're you, and they use
At
your
the very
powers.
least, they should be able to merge into darkness for free.
No, because that's another one of your
But they're
powers.
actually made of darkness, Jet.
One interesting way, I guess, that you could get around that is you could
You have
pull
to
them
write the
into
specification
darkness
in.
and then just let them move around without using a power, right? Because
Like you make them in the darkness in the first place, kind of thing.
or just like
But
if
once
you
you pop
made
them-
them and then like you use your power to go into the darkness and then just like pulled them in,
Like
so
they're
that
just,
they
you
don't
all
have to
like hold
actually
hands
use-
and you
yeah.
daisy chain into the darkness.
Yeah, so you only use one power, but then are able to still move in. They just like if they leave and then want to go back in, you have to at least use one more power to pull them
Like
back
let
in.
them get out.
Yeah. To let them get out, I thought to like pull them back in.
Oh, I thought you were talking about them leaving the darkness.
No, like they could leave, but
They
then
can't
like,
leave on their
unless-
own. I have to pull them out myself.
You need a power usage to like go in and out, because that's how his
And
power.
on top of that, the way I understood my power was that I couldn't drag people in and out by myself. I
It
could.
depends on how it's written.
It's not.
It is dependent on how it's written.
My power's not written in a way that would define that.
Okay, then it sounds like that's something you could have done. You can thank Winslow for the idea.
But Jet,
I didn't say I mean, it's all about finding creative ways to use your power.
But Jet, then I could just trap people in darkness.
Let's see.
And more than likely they can't get out, with like very few exceptions.
That
Okay.
sounds pretty OP. That sounds cool.
Well, that's the thing. It's not challenging. It's not engaging. If I can just trap most people in darkness, then what am I having to ever deal with?
Somebody
feel
that
like-
can walk in and out of darkness.
Yeah, it sounds like as soon as you face something that like challenges your power, you're just gonna get pissed because no, I made my thing so that I could not have to deal with it. Oh no. And I mean, that's a reasonable response. Superman isn't happy when he punches someone and they're like, I'm as strong as you. But at the same time, you can't be upset because there has to be a story.
Of course,
You
there's
can't be
gonna-
like, oh man,
Of
it's a
course there's gonna be
challenge that
opposition.
directly challenges me.
Of course there's going to be opposition, but
Uh.
here's the other thing, Jay. You can't make things explicitly always like that, which is what you did a lot with the original Jank Heroes, where it's like, you've got these powers, and let me go ahead and make something that's not weak to any of the stuff that you have as powers.
But you have to think, like, again, Jank Heroes is supposed to be an RPG that's heavily based on, like, comic books. It's supposed to be like that. In comics, when you read Superman fights niggas who are like, I'm literally kryptonite.
I also- But Jet, do you understand that I don't like comics explicitly because of that fact? The fact that it's just the fact that you have these heroes that are overpowered and yet they get screwed over by the stupidest things and they never have a good time?
Well, as someone who enjoys comics and is making a game that's heavily based on comics, I feel like it's safe for me to say, if you don't like comic books very much, you're probably not going to like Jank Heroes very much, because it's a comic book inspired game.
But yet there are still ways to make the systems work. Even most superheroes have hard limitations on them.
That's based on how your powers are.
But that's not the same thing as power usage, and it's not the same thing as being able to make any power. Even Superman doesn't have the ability to use any power.
But you also don't, because all your things are pre-written.
They're
If
pre-written,
anything-
but you can create whatever set of powers you want.
True, but pushing, which is something you're a big fan of, is actually you can have any power if you push and you get it.
Right, but I still felt like there were consequences because if you made it, if you failed to push, it became a 2, and you would never be able to get
True,
it.
you can never get that power.
I will say, I think for my game, the only like big blockades would be continuity things and like just the general consequences of things.
And that's a fine
'Cause, like,
system.
yeah, well, because the thing is, I feel like about roles and stuff. Like for example, how you do like you roll to see if you woke up on time or whatever. I would want to do a similar thing, like do you set an alarm? Yeah, fine, and we'll just snap me out. Then you don't have to roll for that anymore.
He talked about how you could fix like the sleep problem and like
Plain slice of life, even with like the hints of magic that you have in it, it's very hard to keep interest for a decently long period of time.
Well, that would be the interesting thing is I think it would like eventually get into like the OP levels. Like that would be the point of it. you would just start out at a baseline.
But
like it would scale
how
with whatever
fast
you do.
does it move is the problem.
As fast as you want it to.
Yeah, it depends on what your character's doing. Real
But
quick, can I
You're
read, like,
completely
some-
destroying your body, moving at breakneck pace. You're eventually just gonna die from pushing your body far too hard.
Oh,
But it depends on like how
How
do
you
your
do it,
training
yeah.
and stuff.
do you mind if I read some chat real quick?
Not at all. As long as the next thing is like, we're about to jump into the game. Like,
Scavenger said, I would turn them all into a mud puddle. Insta-kill boy. Kirby said, remember, Winslow took 4 bullets and took 2 damage. Scavenger said, my mud transformation does 18 damage.
Also,
And he
proper
says, oh,
damage
wait, no,
scaling is
16.
sort of a useful thing, Jet. I
Scavenger
don't know
said,
if you noticed.
works around boy. Then Scavenger said, Mr. Hand, do you not even like Spider-Man? So that was just straight up a question.
As far as heroes that I have like a mild interest in, the only ones that I mildly care about would be like Iron Man and Batman.
So like normal guys with
Yeah,
like
that
resources.
are actually working to. And granted, I'll say that Batman's probably a bit overpowered by.
He's not even like just a normal human anymore.
Right, but I still feel like they more or less earn theirs for the most part.
well, I feel like that would be definitely a thing that would be sort of incorporated into mine. It's like
I feel like yours is very similar to the kind of like hero thing you're describing, where like they started. Well, they don't really start from the bottom though. They're like, I'm from a rich family and I have all these resources behind
Like
me.
Batman's, well, they're both pretty bad with like the rich
But I think-
resource, but like even still, they still relatively work for it, especially in a world filled with heroes.
I think Batman works for it really hard, and Iron Man.
Iron Man maybe gets it thrown in his lap a little.
Yeah, he's like, not only am I good at science,
Mhm.
but I have all this money to make sure I get better at science. And then I come from
then he
like a
gets an arc
science
reactor.
company where I can look at more science.
Mhm.
Like it's all
And
thrown
then
in
he
his
gets the
face.
arc reactor.
Because Batman's parents aren't like, we were ninja, acrobat, science. Like, it's not like his whole background pushes him forward as a person. He has to go out of his way. Where Tony Stark, everything's in his lap, and it's just like, will you take it? And he's like, I will. I was also born an intellectual prodigy, so I can take it.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. Another thing about the game, to get a little bit off track, would be like, first off, I think the idea of it would be like you can go wherever you want. So like if you spend all your time doing like physical training, eventually you could get into like Dragon Ball Z levels, like where you're just like training so much that you like enhance your body beyond human capabilities. Or like if you're doing things with like modifications as far as armors and things like that, like you could start to get to a point where like you affect rules and stuff, like if you have to roll a d20, like whatever it's going to be is going to be reduced by 2, because like you have an armor that you like upgraded to that point that like deflects things or that like moves energy around it.
Again, my
like
biggest problem with it is the time that it takes to get through the stuff from going from plane to like these high levels.
But it'd be like scalar. So even when you're on really low levels, you have things that are like challenges that you're like, oh, I gotta like figure out a way, even though it seems simple, like, oh, I gotta figure out a way to get around this. Which I feel like is a thing with Jank Heroes that like you have, but you don't have like an initial like difficult part that's just kind of boring. Like I feel like that's something that I kind of like with some games, is just the fact that you start off with like
Start off
kind of
small and then
nothing,
move up.
and you right. So there's like a part of the game where you have to like in Minecraft where you have to like start building like tools and stuff.
And then once you finally like build a whole bunch, you're like, look how far I've gone.
Right.
As anyone who like plays card games with me knows, I really don't like slow games, and I recently went on a kick where I was trying to find card games faster than Yu-Gi-Oh! Like Fist of Truth, where like matches are like 2 minutes at max. Like I like really fast progression, but I also like really creative systems where you can like build around it and like make what you want.
And most scenarios don't work with that. Like very
I
few.
heavily disagree.
But I will say, I think the way that I'll sort of balance that for people who like to do that is like it all depends on how you play. So like you can put all your eggs in one basket, and then that thing will become really strong and will advance really, really quickly. So you'll be able to like have something that's really strong. Like if you tried to do a Goku thing, like you could get those powers relatively quickly, and then use that to stop all the adverse effects that come up because of it. But if you choose to like be very balanced and take a slower pace to the game, you can still, you have like more reach and more things that you can do, and you have less adverse effects. So it depends on like how quickly or how slowly you want to move, like how much you invest in what.
It sounds like the big con is just like if you take less time, you get more cons, but if you take more time, you get more pros.
Right.
So it does have a lot to do with like patience. Where I feel like Jank Heroes, it has a lot to do with like creative, like adapting.
But yet you essentially have everything that you're ever going to use in Jank Heroes.
But
That's
you
the
can
problem.
learn new ways to use them to make you better.
But that's not really a significant form of growth.
Whoa! Do you remember when you couldn't teleport
Yeah.
and you
but
drove
that-
your shitty Honda Civic
yeah.
into the building? Like, yeah, like
But-
it's a big change.
But I do think, as far as like trying to create, as far as like the creative like decisions, I think that would be a cool thing for people who do want to go fast. If you want to try and do all your stuff like at once, as long as you can get around things that happen, you're fine. You just might have to make decisions that are like maybe not what you wanted to do. Like if you're trying to be a superhero and it's like, oh, you don't have any money and everyone hates you, like you might have to do something that goes against your morals or something to like try to stay
like build
alive.
you.
Yeah, and then like come back from it and it like shapes you.
Now I do have to agree that like Winslow's system makes it where even if you are someone who's gonna speed into it, you just gotta deal with it. Where I feel like if you're not someone that can like adapt and like come up with creative solutions for like the stuff thrown at you in Jank Heroes, you're just gonna die. Like there's not much you can really do about it.
You can sort of just leave. Like you can try an escape thing. Like there's always, I feel like there'll always be a way to prolong things.
Well, I feel like the big thing in Jank Heroes is I'll try and throw something at you with the knowledge that I feel like you can beat it. And then if you like already feel defeated from the get-go and you can't think of anything, then like I'm not gonna hold it back just because you're not like there. Yeah, like I just
So
feel
you're just
like
going to screw someone over.
not really. Like I feel like again it's player agency. If you don't fight the monster's gonna not fight you. The monster's not gonna look at you, not fight them, and go,
But
well,
Jed,
I guess I won't fight
you need to have a better understanding of your players then, Jed.
Well,
I feel like the only way my game would do that is like if you dug yourself a hole. Like if you were like trying to fix something and like if you were like, I'm gonna rob a bank and it's like, okay, now the police are after you and you don't have like money or time to like get away, so you should probably hide, and you're like, fuck that, I'm gonna walk out into the street and start shooting the police. Then it's like, okay, but you're kind of putting yourself in a situation where you're basically gonna die. So at that point I'll just let it happen, but like I didn't make it to where you couldn't escape that situation.
well, I feel the same way in Jank Heroes. Like when I throw things at you guys, I like fully believe they're gonna like get out of it, and I understand what you can do. Like I know what you're capable of. But if you hit it with the like, I have no idea what to do and I can't do anything. That's part of why Plain White exists. Like he can give you like some help, but I'm not gonna just have him completely hold your hand, right? And if you like just can't take it, you'll just die, and it'll just. If Superman was just like, oh, I don't know what to do, like Metropolis just gets fucked. Like that's my thought process. It's like
He's
you're
also
not gonna
super
solve
intellect,
it.
Jed.
Sometimes.
One thing that would be interesting,
Most
I
of the
would
time.
really like if you die in the game, your like the letters of your name, instead of just being like reversed or get like scrambled, so then you can still come back to life, but you're just almost like in like amnesia, like you forgot how to do your thing. So you're starting back at place one, but you could still potentially have your stuff.
Yeah, like you go home and you still have like all your things or
Yeah,
whatever.
but you're just like, I don't know, like I don't remember that. Like if you had, like, oh, I'm the head of a company, like you don't remember that anymore. So like you
Yeah.
have to start like finding things out about your life again and start like moving back up, but you don't have to necessarily start from square one.
In the first Jank Heroes, if you died, your character could come back, but all your powers that you had before are things that your character is incapable of doing. And then you use the push system to get new powers, but you can't use your old powers.
But it was a silly system because your whole character was based around your powers. So if you have things that you're never, ever going to get back, why keep the old character and just not make a new one?
I feel like that's always a thing, though. Like, regardless of what game you're playing, that's like a tabletop RPG, you could always just say, oh, I could just make a better character. Especially when it's a hindsight thing. You can just be like, oh, right.
Well, like, here's the
here's
difference between, like, Jank Heroes and, like, something like D&D. You can metagame both of them really hard.
I feel like my game is one that would reward. Okay. I'm sorry.
Oh, you go.
I was just gonna say, I feel like my game is something that would reward you, like bringing your character back. Because if you just start off new again, you don't have any of your stuff, and you have to start from scratch. Like, you don't have any like preset powers or anything. So like, you have things that you have in life, but like, if you decide, fuck it, I'm gonna just make a better character, it's like, okay, so it's just back to square one.
Well, for the Jank Heroes thing, if you had like items and shit,
yeah,
it's not like they went away. Like, it's the same thing where if you've built up something for your character, whether it be like reputation based with like bond and shit, or it's like with like things that you've gotten, it's just like your power set's gonna be fresh. And there's nothing wrong with that.
But
if anything, it inspires you to play like a better character or a different character.
First thing, bond with negative bond specifically is very hard to get rid of.
I feel like that again is a player agency thing.
Jet,
I mean, because of your advice, I've made a power.
I mean, that's because it was actually a thing, but apparently, because neither of us ever get close to people, we never get bond. But the other thing being that items only do D20 damage. So you could get any item, and it's just as effective as the previous items that you had.
Right.
So the items aren't keeping you with the character, and more than likely you had negative bond in the first Jank Heroes, so why bother?
I feel like effects are like a really big thing, even with powers. Because keep in mind, invisibility in current Jank Heroes can deal potentially as much damage as like my Super Mega God Fist. You know what I mean?
But it's like you use the invisibility as an attack and then you're not invisible. Whereas you can choose to not do damage and you're just invisible.
Yeah, I mean, that is true. But what I'm saying is, like, a part of what makes an item good, like a really good gadget in Jank Heroes, is not how much damage you deal with it, but what the item allows you to do. And I feel like the same goes for powers. You shouldn't make all your powers like, this is an attack, this is an attack. It should be like, this is a utility, because anything can be an attack.
Well, you only really need one attack if you get a D20.
I will say, one interesting thing I might decide to change about the game that would be an interesting way to like start off is, instead of just everybody starting off where they are in life, you start off like relatively based on a roll. So like for whatever you're doing, sort of like when you create your character, like how you roll for powers, you would roll for like different scenarios, like setups, like where you live and like how much money you start off with and stuff like that. So if you just get a really low roll, like in a ratio, like where you get, that depends on like what your starting things are. But even if you get a low thing, it could still help you out, because like if you go from like, oh, I'm in like this super wealthy neighborhood, but I don't have a lot of money because my other role was thing, then like, oh, those people might like work against you because they don't really like you, and like they don't want to give you anything or help you because they're like, oh, you should just have money, like you live here.
Or maybe it could be like a flip, and you could be really charismatic and they could help you out and everything.
Right. Or like if you live in like a really bad place, but it's like everybody else is also sort of in that situation where you live, so it's like, oh, we're just wanting to help each other out and wanting to like get better.
Or maybe it's a rivalry for resources, and it's so like scarce, like I'm not gonna fuck with you because like I have my own thing to do, and I may fuck you up to try and get more resources.
So it depends on like how you play it. For sure.
Yeah, most def, and like how the world like reacts to things. Real quick, I would like to read like some stuff.
Yeah.
Scavenger said, Spider-Man is a normal ass with regular struggles and superpowers. Kirby said, I've never read a comic book, I just like the characters in the books. He mentioned a stream fail. He said, oh, you mentioned Animal Crossing. That was Mr. Hand who mentioned Animal Crossing earlier. Yeah. He says, Nintendo's gonna chase you now. Scavenger said, Batman is a god. Kirby said, Meta Knight can revive a target. I think that's in reference to something. He said, I ran out of moves for Meta Knight, so I gave him a revive effect.
Yeah, he doesn't have a revival move normally, so.
Scavenger said, Imagination Station is where you need to go in order to use your powers. And he said, this gives me inspiration for making a tabletop game. You definitely should, Scavenger. When it comes to, like, the how you roll thing for, like, power usages and, like, number of powers you have, I also feel like that should be a strategy kind of thing. I don't feel like someone should be discouraged if they roll low on like number of powers or even number of power usages. Instead, that should be inspiration for, so how am I going to work around it, and what's my character going to be like? Because you get to pick your occupation and what you major in, and that can really shape how you play your character.
There's a very big difference between that and rolling badly in D&D, because D&D you can actually make it a lot more about the character because of how those stats work in D&D. That it's not just, oh, this is how many times I can do my special move. It's more so, how likable am I? How smart am I? How wise am I? And that lets you work with your character a lot more, to where you can play a character where you might not have the best dice rolls, but you can have interesting adventures because of your flaws. Whereas Jank heroes, it's actively against you, because it's like, hey, I've got low power usage and I'm in this major and I'm gonna do this stuff, but it's not my power stuff. So, and the thing with that then becomes is that you may be like, oh, you have low power, so now you're going to want to try really hard to get really overpowered abilities.
Not necessarily.
But first of all, you'd still have the low power usage, so you wouldn't be able to even use your overpowered ability very often. And then on top of that, the argument of you can pick your school major, you can pick your job, that's very limited in the grand scheme of things as far as how it's going to actually benefit you.
It depends on what, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, I will say this. An interesting thing for like character creation might be to like let you define your own box, in the sense of like the more things you can think of detail wise about your life, like the more things you can put in there. But it goes off of those like base rules. So like whatever you've already predefined in your thing, like you can create subsets inside that of like what would be more description or like more explanation to what you have, to try and give yourself as much of a head start as you can. You just can't like say something that wouldn't make sense for what you already have.
But then you only have one sentence for all your moves, and then 3 sentences for your personality. And
I was just talking about.
He's talking about his game.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm just throwing shade at Jet.
So I feel like, for one, when it comes to like how you describe your character, the 3-sentence personality description gives you like a lot of room for you to try and form a character that you want to play in the way that they act. Serena's a really good example because she went hard on opposites. Like, I'm gonna not be.
Yeah, but then Serena literally asked you and Dozer for every one of her powers.
Well, she like really thought it out. Like I gave her some suggestions in which she was like, "Nah, that doesn't really fit with like who I am." And she wants to become a psychologist, so a lot of her things are based on like people's emotions and trauma and like how they feel. She's really like bringing a character to life based on like what she's interested in. And I'm sure that even if she had rolled like less powers, she just would have had like more refined things. The limits on how long your powers are for like sentences are not supposed to be like heavy burdens. They're supposed to be, I want to understand what your power does, and you want to understand what your power does. And powers get really dumb when they're like not easy to explain. Like when you can't explain your power, it literally means it does everything.
One sentence also limits you in a sense, like, as far as one sentence, you, like, at the very least, you should have given 2 or 3 sentences for a power.
No, it's just too much. Like, for real, there's no power that you can tell me right now that you can't just describe in like
because there
one
are
sentence.
specifications to powers that you can't necessarily explain in a single sentence.
I feel like that's probably too much if you're like adding too much to limit it. Like you're just limiting it on your own accord. The reason why there aren't 2s in this game is because the only limits your powers really should have is the like definition of what it is and the number of times you can use it.
But we're never going to get to a point of agreement, because you're always going to say that OP powers are good, and I'm always going to say OP powers are bad.
Well, they can't be OP in a system that adapts to them.
But
and a system
it
can
doesn't
adapt to them if the system is
It
limited.
doesn't adapt. You just throw really stupid stuff, and if you're not at the peak level of OP, then you're more than likely going to get screwed.
But I feel like it does adapt. I don't feel like you've been screwed over yet.
I haven't really been able to do a whole lot of combat.
That's up to you.
Jet,
You choose
none of my
not to
ability-
fight people.
Jet, I don't have any way to deal with crowds.
Any way to deal with crowds.
Crowds.
You can like make a bunch of clones of yourself, and you can pull
One shot
things,
clones.
and you can pull things from games that give you additional abilities that you just started utilizing in episode like 17 or so.
You also don't give me a whole lot of time to do that, because when I was going to do that after talking to Speedy Case, you decided to throw a dragon at me right off the bat. Like, part of the game portal thing is the secrecy of it, and you don't get secrecy with the subspace communicator. You don't get secrecy when you're thrown into a group.
So why do you feel like the game portal thing requires secrecy?
Because it is very important for your opponents not to know anything. And if Subspace is connected to all heroes, including heroes that can turn bad, then what are you gonna do? They know your number. They can just pull out all your they can point out all your weaknesses and screw you.
I feel like a big issue that you have with the subspace communicator comes only from you not using it. Like, it sounds like, oh man, everyone has this, I really gotta go. Like, you check the time and I was like, oh fuck. It's like, oh man, I have like all these disadvantages and like these people just have a big leg up on me. But not really, because you have the exact same resource, and because you don't utilize it,
but I feel like the
it puts
communication
you at a
network as a
disadvantage.
whole is silly.
But
Like,
it's,
I don't feel that a communication network like Subspace Communicators should have access to every hero in existence, even heroes that you've never heard of before. That's silly. At most, it should function like a regular cell phone where you have the subspace communication style where you can do it instantly, but it's only with people that you know, because at that point, then you're dealing with a whole slew of people that you have no idea what their morals are, what they're trying to accomplish with their lives, and it throws things in array. For example, Aiden, with how his character is built, he will screw you over if he knows anything about you.
That's really true. But subspace exists specifically at, and also, like, here's my like explanation and counter. Subspace exists mainly as a way for you to have it where you can play with other people but not steal the show. I want it to be where if it's a Superman book, I'm reading about Superman, I'm not reading about Green Lantern.
But then
that nigga
have it
could
be a
in it,
communication
but he
network
can't
between
be in the thing.
players and not NPCs.
Well, NPCs also exist in the world. That's like another thing. It's like saying I want a comic, but only give me title characters. Fuck all these side bitches. Like, but that's not how it works because it's again.
But
it's
you can
heavily
still have them, and
comic-based.
you can still have means to communicate with them, just not through subspace.
And then my counter to like other player involvement has to do with like if you also used it. And Aiden had a moment where he's like, it seems like I can use this against him. You would also see that. Like, it wouldn't be like a, oh no.
But if you're on different levels of OPness, then it doesn't matter.
But that's entirely based on what you choose
But
to
that's
be
the
your
thing,
powers.
Jet. And I shouldn't have to play an OP character to have fun, Jet.
But you don't have to.
I sort of do. If
It's-
I have to worry about him watching down my shoulder every time I want to do something because he's stronger than me and he's going to wreck me if I do anything that's not for him, for his decision, then what am I to do but to follow whatever he wants and not have things play out the way I like?
Just make your powers actually what you want them to be and not
But I like my powers not being OP, Jet.
close facsimiles of what you want. Because I feel like you're just going to aggravate yourself when you try to do something and then you're like, but I put a self-limiter and now I can't do it and now I blame the system because I made myself weaker. Like, I don't
blame
get
the
that.
system for allowing OP characters to exist in a state that they're as OP as they are and for them to have a very large impact on non-OP characters.
Because what other players are doing is just picking what they want to do.
Because Aiden
And-
almost just screwed me over today.
Yeah. Player agency. Like, that's
Or
another
not even
thing.
today, yesterday.
That was also, I would say also today. I don't know. Aiden, I guess he didn't screw you over. He
He
screwed
didn't
over
really
fucking
directly
jail
screw me over.
guy.
I mostly screwed over my guy I was watching over.
Yes,
But I didn't really
he
have
did.
too much investment other than the comedy of it.
Matt, I feel like you would have loved it if Home Guy had gotten away, but he didn't.
I told him to go back to his cell.
I mean, you did. But he had a
He
dream.
went to a cell. One that was in the ground, really.
Damn.
But like the fact that Aiden had that leg up on me, that he had the possibility of putting me into a bloodless state,
Mhm.
just because I chose not to be OP. What am I supposed to do other than just be OP and not have as much fun?
Why do you feel like it's directly connected to how much fun you have?
Because
and also, just pick what you want. It
Because
doesn't
I
have to
like
be OP.
having a not OP subject. That's the thing. I don't feel like OP nature is entertaining, at least not by itself. I think there are very few exceptions to that rule. One Punch Man is one of the few exceptions because it actually shows him getting bored with his life. Aiden's never going to get bored with being overpowered.
It sounds like he's just having fun. Like, my thing is...
Then
it's-
that's not interesting. It really isn't.
Well, it sounds like a lot of people like his story and like where his characters.
But that's because of the absurdity of it, and because your audience is specifically geared towards absurdity.
But there are people who like are a fan of like Shadow Darkgale. Like it's not like
Not really, Jet. I'm at the bottom of their lists at the moment.
I'm not entirely sure. I mean, they're watching. We can just ask like, where do you guys rate Shadow Darkgale? Top 4 Jank Heroes characters.
I was in the bottom for like my first 2 or 3.
Yeah, like people didn't fuck with Baby Drowning for real.
No, they didn't.
that was like a big like nah, like why?
I had to grow one.
Yeah, you had to like develop more as a character. Oh, real quick, we do have like a few more live chat things. So Scavenger said I had a low power on Punky and terrible powers, but I still found ways to help out.
But then
And
you
you
made
said-
a new character.
He did, but he also made
Which
the,
was a better version.
But he also made the new character a character that already was in his story, because he had a brother that was his vehicle that he like rode on, and then he made his other character like that person. It's someone that expanded his first character's lore, and he can still play his other character, and it still like makes
But
sense.
how often is he going to go back to his old character is the problem.
His old character can still be there simply because they're like a team
Well, yeah,
dynamic
obviously
anyway.
it's still the same continuity, but
Yeah.
is he actually going to do it?
I mean, that's all up to him. It's still player
Well, like,
agency.
here's the thing. It can be tied in with the story and everything, but if he's not actually going to do it, then does it actually matter?
And I feel like it's a solid like development thing. Like he did it in a way to where it like still works with everything else. By the way, your boy Winslow's doing the hand farts. So Kirby said one of Meta Knight's power limitations is that he must be airborne to use it. That's very specific. Scavenger said, why hasn't the memer killed Darkgale yet? He said, Funnifyic is for overpoweredness though. Not necessarily. It's really you
It's
doing
total
what you
overpowered,
want.
Chet.
It should be you doing what you want.
I was
It's
just
not,
gonna say,
though.
I feel like that's one of the things that I'll enjoy about trying to do this one, and I wouldn't want to play in it because like I want to try to do the GM DM thing, but I feel like I want people to be able to sort of diverge if they want to, like in the same session, and just be like, I'm gonna go somewhere else and do something else if you're like OP and I don't want to deal with it, or like if you're doing stuff that I just don't like, I'm gonna go off and like train my character and get it like really stacked up, and then like as the game master I might find ways to try and like reconnect them, but they could always just be like, nah.
I've never been a fan of the like divided story.
Yeah.
But that also has to do a lot with like the whole comic book aspect. Like it's the title character's book, and I want to read about the title character.
But also you as like a video game player, if you're playing this as like your character, if you're not the GM, if you're playing your character, you're going to be focused on working on your character, so like you'll run into other people and things will hit you that'll be entertaining and we'll be linking up, so you can go and like seek out other people to continue to build the storyline, but it will always be your main character storyline.
And that's even true in games where you have multiple player or multiple perspective campaigns, where you have characters that are meeting up and doing things, and they end up meeting up for some adventures, but then they split off again, and then they might meet up in the final chapter of the game and beat the big bad. But they still had their own stories, they still had their own adventures, and they weren't forced into a situation. They all had specific goals for why they were working together. Whereas you, it's like, oh hey, Dr. Evil's there, you should go and do that. Hey, Dr. Evil's there. Or hey, the jewels are cool, let me go ahead and make this dragon hunt you down, and then let me get the speedsters to hunt you down for it. You're shoving plots in that aren't necessarily like, you're complaining about the whole, if it's the main character, I want to read about the main character. This isn't that argument. This is the argument of, I want to have like a cinematic universe where everything's interconnected. But if they don't want to have it that way, I'm just going to force it down anyway.
Well, one big thing that I really like about Shadow Darkgale runs is that when tie-in stuff happens, it happens in your world and you decide like not to go for it, and I admire that. But at the same time, it's still like a world.
Day and you come in session. They were not a world event.
He's now like a guy that follows Aiden's character.
He's one guy out of a whole group. So, no, what am I
like a
trying?
whole army of guys.
Yes.
But
Everybody else
they're
got
now all
nerfed.
like slimes on.
They're husks.
Yeah.
That doesn't make them worthwhile at all. They're just zombies. They're husks. They don't really have an association at that point.
But they all have access to like like.
But they're husks, Jeff.
It's
They're
something
mindless.
that you gotta see when we get to it. And I also feel like You can't have your character run away from tie-in stuff and then be like, the story doesn't do anything, because the story is based on what you do. So if you don't interact with the tie-in stuff, of course it's going to feel empty because it never has a payoff.
Jet, there's a difference between avoiding tie-in stuff and literally sitting in a room for an hour.
But you chose to sit in a room.
You mean the room that I was getting tracked by Bruiser?
Who you could have dealt with in any way you
Let me
wanted.
punch Hulk. Let me punch Hulk. That's a fair argument.
You also have Shadow Reaver.
If you can open things into the game universe, could you pull things into the game universe?
No. I
The
can
way
only...
that he wrote it, he can't. Also, you can make like things come out of shadows and stab people, and you confuse yourself in shadows, and you're like, I can't fight him. I have no way to be. I can hide and hit with the same thing, but I have no way. Like, he knows where you are, and he's following you, and you're in darkness, and you could just be in darkness the whole time, and then he's like, you're right there, and he like looks down at the shadow, and then you're like, a spike comes out of the shadow and just impales him in the fucking face, and I can do that as many times as I want until I run out of powers, and he's one guy. And then you're like, I have no way to beat him. There's no way I can kill this guy. It's like, what does he do?
Jet, the problem is that I initially did it. He resisted.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, he obviously knew I was trying to attack him, and I obviously had just made the situation worse. If I had kept attacking him,
You probably would have killed him.
I could have killed him.
Yes.
Or I could have failed a few more times, and he would have tried rallying up, oh hey, here's the hero framer. And because he's a hero, he had a subspace communicator, he could have just subspace been like, I need backup. I would have had a SWAT team at my door trying to kill me.
I mean, it all depends on like how things go, but also player agency. Whenever he puts himself in a situation where he's like,
He just
"Oh,
causes
I
them to
killed
kill
someone,"
themselves.
He just has to keep going though. Like, he's finding solutions for putting himself in like what could be holes.
But 9 times out of 10, it's kill yourself.
But Mimer very easily could like kill someone and then just forget about it, and just like later on it could knock on his doorstep and he'd be like, oh right.
It
But
hasn't
he's
really knocked
trying
on
to
his
nip it in
doorstep.
the bud. He's like trying to get rid of this thing.
Most times it doesn't knock on the doorstep. And the only ones particularly it's speedsters, and even then not really.
The one thing I will say that sort of hit up that I haven't been able to use my power for is like the slime guys, because like I can't control their consciousness, so I can't just be like, all of you are gonna kill.
And that's the only
'cause then,
real counter to Aiden, and I
yeah.
sort of appreciate that, but the downside to that is that it's gonna screw everything.
Well, I mean,
Like, if it was just a counter specifically to Aiden for that one time, where it's like, hey, here's an enemy that doesn't have a mind. You gotta figure this out now. And it's like, okay, that's fine. You have to challenge your players sometimes. But, like, this is something where, like, you can't really come in contact with these guys, otherwise you're a zombie. And they don't have minds, so you can't really mind control them. Like,
I will say,
Jared still doesn't get screwed over by this, though.
zombies aren't hard to deal with. What were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say, I will say, I feel like with the zombies specifically, your power comes in really handy.
Well, I can just
because
avoid everything.
that's what I'm saying. You can just go.
But, like,
into
I can
shadow
only
and
deal
do
with
it
so
without that.
much.
But I
From
mean,
things that can never reach you.
yeah, like, because if you go into the shadow thing, you can just be like, I'm gonna go to a specific like safe place that I want to go to, collect a whole bunch of resources, go back into the shadows.
I would have to enter and exit it multiple times. First of all. Second of all, my powers wouldn't really be too useful because I don't have anything that's multi-hitting. If we go off of the assumption that clones can have personalities,
Mhm.
then there's also a good likelihood that they can be zombified. I'm trying to think what else would be an issue. I can obviously hide in darkness, and I can darkness reaver multiple times from darkness, but I only have so many powers. So, and granted, that actually doesn't make any sense. How was he able to resist? Oh no, he didn't resist Aiden, it just didn't work. So darkness reaver would work flawlessly, but I only have so many darkness reavers.
Could you use your game portal to pull out like a force field that you just carry around with you so that they can't ever touch you, and then you just
I
take
mean,
them?
we're also assuming that they won't go through the force.
I mean, if it's a force field, like they can't just.
Like, the argument that I could I feel like Jet could even very easily make. They're very acidic creatures that can jump really high. Who's to say that they're not gonna dig under your force field?
They very well could, but if it's something you're carrying around with you, you just move. They'd
Yeah,
be like
sure.
trying
But
to
you're
dig.
not gonna be making a whole lot of, like, the whole point of moving would be to shadow merge, which is using powers as it is.
Mhm.
Because shadow merge is the only way I can safely move.
Matt
in a slime
does have a
infest.
good point of like, why would I move in like a possible safety when I have a guaranteed safety?
I guess my reason would be because you said it uses your power a lot. So like if
Well,
you
I can only
didn't
use my
wanna-
power if I enter and exit.
Right. So like if you have to enter and then you have to exit again, that's like 2 power uses. But if you pull out something that
actually
you
only
can
one.
just
Yeah, he made it where it's only one. He can
Oh,
like,
okay.
yeah, as long as he's in, he can get out. He was like, I don't want a dumb thing where I run out of
Yeah.
powers, I'm stuck in the darkness.
Yeah. No, okay, that makes
Yeah,
more
and it
sense.
makes sense to make it like that.
Mhm.
There's no reason to limit
But like the
yourself.
force
where you
field thing,
can't.
it won't buy me enough time to make it worthwhile.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree that just staying in like darkness is safe. I don't think they're gonna acid. They
The
touch a
darkness.
shadow, the acid.
Well, like the
burns
thing is,
the
even if they
darkness.
ate the entire Earth, I still have space.
Mhm.
Yeah, space is dark. Real quick on live chat. Let's see. So Kirby said, "Funnifyic is what you make it," and that's really true. Scavenger said, "I like remix because it fits its purpose, which is to be serious and have rules." He said, "Let me turn Bruiser to a mud puddle." He said, "But you
Bruiser's in
didn't."
hell.
But he said, "But you didn't want us to help you." Like he was like, "I wanted to like help in some way."
Well, here's
but
the
you
other thing,
don't-
though. If
you
I
like
look-
being a loner.
And like, it's both from a perspective of the player and the perspective of the character. My character, and I will flat out just say this with my character feels like a lot of times with situations that when he works with people, they have their own motives on things. And it muddles plans that he makes that he feels would more or less work in a situation. And alternatively, it can also be said that he's had a lot of past experiences, both within the game and even you could argue, I could make an argument, backstory, where he'd have worked with people, or he'd have tried to rely on people to do a specific thing, and they just don't deliver. That's why he has a clone ability, ability where it's the argument that you can make with Naruto with the shadow clones. It's the argument of why rely on people when you can do everything yourself and be good. As a player, it's the fact that too many people are beyond my level of skill, my level of power, that my problems just get solved by other people, and it's like, why am I playing this game if people are just going to solve my problems for me?
Because you never know how much is coming. It's not like when you start the session, level
But
1.
it makes me feel pointless if other people are solving my problems.
I feel like it's heavily like dependent. Like for one, it's not like any one problem you face in a session is the only problem that you will face in a session. Because it's not like monster of the week. You got like one enemy and you got to deal with them. You can straight up throughout a whole session like end up not fighting anyone or fighting like 7 dudes or like you have things where it's like you just passively went around that whole session more or less, and the guy like had the chair with the girl, and you've had session where a giant monster attacked, but actually trying to defend the city from aliens. You have to fight aliens, and like just a lot happens. And also, you needed other people for the alien thing. I'm sorry, that was.
And I did, but like, let's put this into perspective and put that into perspective of the character's story. I did a lot of work. I killed a 200-foot monster. I killed like 80 UFOs. I had only like 5 powers left. From my perspective of a pragmatist who heard that heroes were all over the city trying to deal with the situation, my thought process would be, hey, there are other heroes dealing with the situation. I put a lot of work. They should be able to finish it up. Clearly they didn't. The city almost got blown up.
Mm-hmm.
If it wasn't for our Deus Ex Machina candy, the city should be a giant crater. And quite frankly, I would have preferred it if it had been a giant crater and you didn't pull a Deus Ex. Make us deal with the consequences of having Springdale be a crater.
People like the sacrifice of candy.
It was very silly, Jen, and we called you out really hard on it.
What? People liked candy. Tell me in the live chat.
We called you out very hard on making candy and making her a Deus Ex.
It fit with her description. What were you?
I was just gonna say, would you have enough time to make a character?
Hell no. It's like past midnight.
But you've also
I'm
been-
already gonna get
But
fucked.
you've been going over your time.
I know I've been going over my time. I know that like around 1, I would have to like definitely leave.
But so that's why I was saying, like, you could totally do it. Because I kind of want to see, like, how...
Like, the only thing I would say before making Jet make a character is definitely have fully established what you're going to do. Like, I'd probably write things out a little bit, read it over, see if it would make sense for your perspective on how you're trying to make this game.
Okay.
I wouldn't just throw Jet into it immediately, especially when you're probably going to make changes to the game later on.
Let's see. Kirby said, could Darkness Reaver make multiple spikes for hitting multiple enemies?
No, one spike.
Okay. And he asked if it was at night where like shadows were everywhere.
Yeah, I definitely do better in darkness, but the funny thing is that it doesn't really matter because Jet has never called me out on traveling in daylight.
I have not. I just assume there's like a shadow somewhere. I think I've only called you out with like, is there a cloud
You only
cover?
called me out the first time.
Yeah, I really don't think about it for the most part because I feel like it should work most of the time. I feel like the shadow dimension, like all shadows are connected or something, and you're just like moving through.
Because it's technically viewable darkness. Actually, I don't think Shadow Merge specifies viewable darkness.
I think the only time where it wouldn't work is if you got brought to, like, the middle of a desert that's, like, really flat.
Yeah, I'd be sort of screwed in there because it's pretty much all daylight.
Yeah.
I mean, I could do shadow clones still because I can summon them on my own shadow.
Yeah.
But
You make him just to make the shadow?
Yeah.
That actually sounds really clutch. Yeah, I feel like you should do more stuff like that. Like, I feel like
I
your
don't
powers...
get set into a desert every day.
I know, but your powers really do chain together more than I feel like you think. Kirby said one of Meta Knight's powers plunges the world into darkness, so it sounds like you two could do a really solid team-up
What
thing,
about
but he
if
hates
you did
team-ups.
get sent to the sun?
Huh?
What about if you did get sent to the sun?
And there's-
Because there's, like, no
He's
shadow.
like the darkness of space, is what he would go for.
Well, that's a. It depends on how close I would have to actually be. Like, it doesn't say viewable darkness; it just says darkness. So you can make the argument that I can go to any darkness.
But if you were, like, in the center of the sun.
I was planning on
think
getting an
that's
item that
death.
teleports me back home, but it depends on.
I think that's like a timing thing then, right?
Yeah.
What goes off first? Scavenger said, Candy was a plot device. I wish I took her communicator, though, because it amps powers. I'm not sure why you think that it amps powers. but
Because you
that's
said
an
it was an
interesting
adjusted
theory.
communicator, even though you didn't specify that it amped anything.
I guess we would have to see if that's a thing.
But-
That's an interesting theory.
Nobody's kept track of Candy's subspace communicator. We have no idea where that thing is.
Yeah, and a lot of stuff has happened since then. But let's see. We still do have some time. Scavenger said, because you said it made her amp her powers.
No,
I said that it said that she amps her powers.
Yeah.
Like it could talk.
and that she modified it.
Yeah. Kirby said, can't you track it by like looking through it? That's to say that it's not busted or not being used by someone else. Like it would be hard to tell if it was Candy's subspace communicator if it was on like someone else's wrist.
Well, if it's still active, it's very easy to track it.
I don't know.
I was gonna say, how did you think of the name Jank Heroes? Because, like, would you guys have any suggestions for the name of the game?
Just wait for someone to hit you with adjectives. I'm pretty sure Jank Heroes, I played it and I didn't have a name. And then I think Jared was like, oh, that was really Jank. And I was like, Jank Heroes. And for Funnifyic, it was literally like, Jared, throw me 3 adjectives. I put those bitches together and it's like, Funnifyic. So, I mean, it's literally whatever.
Literally what?
And then the game is about you doing literally whatever you want. Yeah, see? It's like that. That's exactly how names are born. Scavenger said, you said it was custom. Custom means awesome. Then Kirby said, dank. So, you should definitely publish it if you make like a full book thing.
Yeah,
Sell it on the internet and get no money because nobody buys books.
of course.
I mean, people buy books. By the way, if any of those things I described, like OmniQuest and fucking Jank Heroes, we got plenty of guidebooks. So that Amazon fucking the store is real. Well, but let's see. I do want to see you do like more creative things with your powers. I feel like you undersell your abilities and say I'm not OP, but I feel like if you were to really make techniques that involve using multiple powers,
Here's
you
the thing
would
with
learn and do
techniques, though,
crazy
Jed.
stuff.
Is that techniques only really work in a system where you're not limited by your powers so much as you are limited by your skill level and how you're applying it. That's why things like sword techniques make a lot more sense than like combination techniques for powers, especially when combination techniques for powers require a lot of resources to do. For example, I could maybe do some weird thing where I make like a, trying to think what I'm trying to, like a clone mecha thing. But when the clones die in one hit, why would I do that?
I feel like that still sounds really achievable based on how you can make so many clones. It's just really thick, right? And the idea is like if someone hit you, a bunch of them would go away, but you still would have a bunch left. A bunch assuming you're being hit by an equally sized thing. If like a bullet hit your mech, it would probably hit like one of your clones.
But then that really screws me up if like standard police starts shooting.
Just a bunch of bullets. I don't know, they're pretty bad shots based on your last things. And that wasn't even a multiple power use. Like what you described, because your clone thing has no limit,
well, like,
sounds like one use and I have like big formation.
What I'm going to point out is that it's going to be very hard to keep clones together in a format like that. Like they're still more or less my anatomy. So if they're more or less my anatomy, it's going to be very hard to link them together into a giant mecha without having to pour a whole lot of other resources into that.
It sounds almost like a really, really advanced cheerleader formation.
Like you have to tie their bodies together and stuff like that, and because it's based on human anatomy, it wouldn't work.
We'll see. Like it depends on how you describe it, I guess. A big part of it, and Jared even brought this up. He was like, one of the best things I liked about old Jank Heroes was that it was simply learning how to work around your logic. And he's like, it didn't matter as much if it made sense to me. If I understood how you thought, Jet, I could like work with.
Well, like that's abusing the system at that point, Jen. And I really.
But is it?
It sort of is because it's abusing your concepts of things.
I don't think it's abuse. That's just understanding your game world by understanding the person who's making it.
But then that's heavy metagaming.
But that's not really. I can always adapt to what you do. Like that's what I'm saying. Real quick, Scavenger says he's making the character sheet for the tabletop that he's currently making. So congratulations, Scavenger. He said fuse all your powers together into one ultra power. He said I can make mud minions that can teleport anything to the sun by touching them because he has the power to teleport anything as long as it's touching mud. So he can like make a mud minion grab you, and because you're touching mud, he can teleport.
But my
you wherever
abilities don't do that. I have Shadow Merge, which is more or less for me only. The clones, which granted infinite, but even still, they're just one-shot clones.
But it sounds like they could help produce darkness, so that's how it can tie directly into that.
But like that's only semi-useful because in a situation for Darkness Reaver, everybody casts shadows, so I don't need artificial shadows to use Darkness Reaver.
Also, have you ever thought of making one really big spike?
That's what Darkness Reaver is?
No. I mean, like, period. Like, instead of trying to hit one guy, make a spike that's surface area is just really big, and it becomes more of a blunt strike. Again, I don't like saying ideas because it just gives
but it's still 20 damage, Chet.
Yeah, flat. Not even, like, additional.
Well, what I'm
that's
saying
really
is, what
good.
does it matter if it's pointy or blunt?
Because, I see what you mean. Like, it's not like an impale. Well, the idea is that because you have a bigger surface area and you can hit so many people, it makes Shadow Reaver like a way better attack because you can just hit. I think it actually only says enemy. It just says enemy? So again, that's just a self-limitation.
But Jet, it's ridiculous that.
But it's a ridiculous self-limitation. You don't have to limit yourself.
But Jet, when you limit yourself, you get into more interesting scenarios, but at the same time,
you get into more interesting scenarios.
But those
those
limitations only work in a scenario where you're not dealing with overpowered people.
That just sounds weird, like, because it sounds like from your logic, you want to have fun, but you feel like if your character is too OP, then you won't have fun, so you limit your character. But then you feel like I can't have fun with a not OP character because I'm surrounded by OP characters. So it just sounds
it's a lose-lose situation.
Not really. It sounds like you have the assumption that you won't have fun if you feel your character is OP. And essentially what I hear a lot of people say is not that your character needs to be OP, your character just needs to be decent. If you look at your character and
my character's even decent though, Jed.
If you feel like your character is low tier in a game where you can make your character do anything, then that sounds like you forced your character to be low tier.
My character is decent, but it's also low tier, Jet.
That doesn't sound right.
It makes perfect sense. It's decent because with perspective to other like possible movesets, it's alright. It's not the absolute worst. I'm not picking powers that are actively harming me. And they sort of help me in a decent amount of situations. But they're not overpowered. They're not like I can just warp anybody anywhere or any amount of things anywhere. Or it's not like I can convince any number of people to do what I want. Like, you can't, my powers can't combat that directly.
I still feel like low tier and decent don't go together.
Well,
like,
they do in this scenario, Jet.
That doesn't make sense.
Because I'm low tier with compared to other players, but I'm decent in terms of what my power set actually is.
Because it sounds like, man, if I was not compared to other people, getting a 5 on this test would be really good, but a lot of people made like 75, so my test grade isn't that good. But a 5 is a F regardless.
But it actually does mean more, Jet. Because if everybody's getting 75 and you're getting a 5, then it's like, oh shoot, I really don't understand what's going on in this class. Whereas if you're a solitary 5, it's like, okay, maybe the teacher is very hard grader, maybe I didn't understand everything quite right, but I had the general idea. Like, you having a 5 in solitude versus having a 5 compared to a bunch of 75s is an indication that, oh, I need to get incredibly better at this when compared to other people, whereas in 5 you don't have enough information to say, hey, this is good or bad.
But you're not a solitude 5. If anything, for this analogy, this is the 3rd time you've taken this test, and you know that everybody makes 75s on it, but you're like, no, I'm not going to study for it. I'm going hard for that 5.
But that's not the correct analogy, Jet.
So the parts where it's analogous is like, this is your 3rd time playing Jank Heroes, and you know that everyone picks really crazy powers, but you're choosing not to pick really crazy powers, but you feel like you've been down this road before, and it hasn't ended well for you.
To be
before,
fair, Jet, I
doing
was
it again.
giving this game benefit of the doubt because it was a new version of Jank Heroes. Whereas in the other two, the first time actually really all 3 attempts that I made in the first Jank Heroes, with the 3rd one not coming into fruition at all, they were more or less just ways so that I can hang out with you guys. Even this is, to a certain extent, just to hang out with you guys.
Well, I mean, I really like hanging out, but I feel like you can enjoy the game as well.
Well, like
there are plenty of
I can try to enjoy the game, but then I get screwed over. First time I die, I get gangbanged. Second time I die, I get sent into a dimension that I thought was going to be cool, and then I get screwed over. Attempt to get into the 3rd time, I'm not allowed to have a roulette.
Gosh. Aiden, Matt really tried to push, because I'm glad you reminded me of that. He tried to push for a power that was like...
Or I tried starting with a power.
Yeah, he tried to start with a power where he's like, I roll a d20, and if it lands on like one particular number, I get any power I want. And it doesn't work with like normal pushing rules, so there's like no downside to me like not getting.
So it's like if it lands on a 7, then I get to choose whatever power.
Yeah, I get whatever.
Alternatively, if I were to get like 4 or not 4/5, that'd be scary. If I were to get like 1/5 to 1/4 of the die, I would get like a 2. Then I think 0 and 1 was split between another 1/4 or 1/5, and then like an item was split between a 1/4 and 1/5. But on top of that, those things were randomized.
But it's still really gross.
It's not that bad, Jet. Especially
essentially
with how bad I roll my dice.
So, with Jank Heroes, the old one, you didn't have a limit of how many power usages you had. So, essentially what he could do is just keep rolling a d20 for as many... until you just got whatever you wanted. Forever.
But if I remember correctly, the roulette was going to be a 1, so I had to check in order to see if I could even roll a roulette.
But
and
even if you failed the check
also
on
on top of
roulette,
that, I specifically made it a limit of once per day.
It still was gross. Like, I just didn't like... I just felt like the power was like...
It was a once per day roulette.
But then it was a
rarely ever
power.
pays off.
Like, a big part of the old Jank Heroes was you give yourself like one limitation, like a 2. But if you're like selling your power and you're pitching it, and I'm like, oh, your power seems really gross, and you have to keep limiting it even more, then I'm like, no, I don't want you to keep limiting your power.
Just choose something else.
Yeah, just choose something that's just a better power. It just sounded bad.
But Jed, I rolled terribly, and it was a once per day roulette.
But it just sounds shitty the way you describe it. Like, it sounds like it just doesn't work for you.
I have character design for literally whatever.
I'm glad that that's
Design,
the name.
yeah, that's the name. Design, and I want you guys, I'm going to say it all out. Let me know if there's anything you can think of that you feel like would add more to it when you start out, or like if you feel like there's anything that I might have missed. Okay, so character design. Area of the city that you live in. Describe your ideal area that you would want to live in. Then roll a d20 to decide on how similar or opposite to your description your home area results.
So can I just say I want to live in a really poor area and happen to get a rich place?
Yeah,
Because you did a shitter roll.
but if you really wanted to live in a rich place and you rolled really close to what, like, if you rolled a really high number, you just end up living in a really poor place. So like, it's to whatever your description is.
Sort of silly,
I mean,
maybe?
it's the same. Okay.
I mean, I like it.
Like, I feel like it should more be a range of dice
Mhm.
on that one.
So like multiple rolls or like.
I like where you're going. For one, I like that it's like, are you rolling 1d20 or 2d20?
One.
I like that he's rolling with 1d20. It's already a better game system. A lot of people are intimidated by like game systems where you have to have all these different dice and you gotta keep up with like different number counts and shit.
I feel like
So,
different dice is fine though, because
I'm not a fan.
because especially like with damage scaling, it actually matters that you have different dice for damage scaling. Whereas Jet just throws everything under the umbrella of D20 or insta kill.
I feel like for this, the way like that you move forward with your character, you could design things where you like for multipliers or for things like that, like you could end up rolling more die if you choose to for like specific things in game. But for this, just to make it simple, I
And
guess.
by range, I didn't mean like multiple dice. I meant one die. Different numbers give you different things.
No, that's how it would be. So like if you roll, if you're
But like it's not like a preference thing is what I'm getting at. Like throw the preference thing out
I love the preference.
because at that point you can get really screwed over by that.
That's great.
Well, but I mean, I guess it depends on like how you say it. Like if you're like, I want to live in like a really upscale place in like Beverly Hills, and you roll a 20, and it's like, okay, you live there. If you roll like a 19, it's like you live in Beverly Hills and you live in a pretty upscale place, but like on the edge of like the upscale place, and like you start.
I'm on the
down.
bad
But like
side of
what happens if you
upscale.
pick, what happens if you pick like a middle class place? Where do you go there?
Well,
That's
here's
actually
the
really
interesting thing.
interesting.
Here's the interesting thing. That's just for the area that you live in. So then you have your house. So you could live in a really shitty place and have a really great house, and then it might fuck you over because like everyone hates you because you're just the one person that has a.
But what
really
happens if
nice
you're in a
house.
middle class neighborhood in a middle class house?
Seems like you got what you wanted. That sounds like you rolled for
But no, what I'm saying is you preference that. Where do your dice rolls go from?
He's saying if I roll the opposite of middle class, what am I?
That's really interesting. That's really interesting.
Like, and that's why I feel like the preferencing is sort of bad because I feel like it should be more of a range where it's like 1 to 5, you're in the bad neighborhood. Like I'd say 6, like on average you should get the middle class. So
And that-
6 to like
and that
14.
definitely makes sense. I guess the reason that I have it like this is so that like you have a chance to do what you want instead of
Yeah.
being like in trouble.
Completely.
What
and
I
like
would
what I
ask-
would add to that is that like you can have that don't want to have to deal with high costs,
Mhm.
or you can be B and have it be like you roll like for example your neighborhood, and then it's like okay, so I'm gonna take a
and you have
like you can only go as far as the minimum
As-
to get into that district. Like for example, you can't be like oh I have a 10, I'm gonna go all the way to 1. That'd be silly.
right. Well, like the thing for me, if you got like a 20 and then you had additional, you couldn't be like, I'm gonna just get like this crazy thing.
Oh yeah, no, I would
Okay.
I completely agree. You should not be able to go into negative or positive or
Yeah.
above the maximum.
The simpler you go, I feel like the better your setup is.
Mhm.
So, I feel like what you guys just described sounds like you made like a really balanced thing, right?
Mhm.
But it also sounds like a lot more that I have to deal with if I just want to play a game.
But
like
that's
I
the
walk
problem.
into,
You don't like balanced games.
but I mean with your thing, right? what is the opposite of middle class? I think if middle class is super balanced, the opposite of middle class is like Beverly Hillbillies bullshit. Like, you're like, I just want to live a normal life. And then it's like, well, you have to really, and not that.
Yeah.
So your shit's just really not
But
normal.
there are two opposites to middle class.
I would
Really
say,
rich or really poor.
So it's a combination of both.
I
Like,
would
that's
say
how you hit it.
if someone just said middle class, I'd ask them to explain more, like get more specific.
And
about
that way
what
you
it is.
can reverse it better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because like even if you just said like rich, like I could say poor, but then that, like there's more. There needs a
There's
little bit
more
more
to
description. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why you always want like detail but never too much.
Mhm.
That's why asking for things like one sentence can keep it concise, well defined, and you can figure out ways around it as
But when
well
it's
as things
overly
to help.
simple, it's overly exploitable.
One sentence doesn't mean overly simple.
I don't think I would make it be one sentence because even if you did like a lot, like even if you did a paragraph,
You'd be
I would-
fine with that.
I would
yeah.
I would just go through it and be
Mhm.
like the opposite of that, opposite of that, opposite of that. So house type, describe your ideal home that you would want to live in, then roll a d20 to decide on how similar, opposite to your description, your home results. All of these are basically the same, like same for vehicle type.
Mhm.
Describe your vehicle that you would want, then roll a d20 to decide on how similar, opposite to your description your vehicle is. Education, describe your ideal education scenario, then roll a d20 to decide how similar or opposite to your description your education previous to your starting point results.
And this is why I sort of feel like the taking hits thing is a better system. It's a more balanced system that allows you to actually specify in where you're trying to go.
Well, I feel like I really like yours because it's really exact, and it puts someone in a situation where if you get what you want, you're happy.
Mhm.
But if you don't get what you want, you have something directly to strive for. You're not put in a neutral situation where you're like, not only did I not get what I want, but I'm just kind of stuck somewhere.
Right. And hopefully everybody would get like a little bit of a balance of both. You're
Yeah,
like, oh, I
over
really,
your
Unless
course
you're
of
me
roles.
and you roll terribly all the time.
Yeah, and
But
Matt's
the-
like, what if I just get straight opposites for everything?
but even if you get straight opposites, there'll still be like a lot of unique opportunities that can get you there. Like if you end up in a really bad neighborhood, you could like sell crack and then make a lot of money and then like move
I
to
What
thought-
about if you have
Argentina.
morals and you
I
don't
thought
sell
you were
crap?
gonna say maybe you'll get a scholarship because you live in like a bad part of town, or like
That's
government
true.
funding or
No,
some shit.
that might very well be a thing as well.
Yeah. I would like to read some chat stuff real quick because I will have to dip soon. It's like 12:59. So Scavenger said, oh wait, hold on. Scavenger said it's called imagination. Then Kirby said just use your clones to fool your opponents like magical hats or double team. Scavenger said abuse the system. Kirby said maybe if enemies are close to each other, make a Reaver targeting an enemy that is actually big enough to also hit an enemy behind the primary target. Scavenger says, in the one I'm designing right now, there's actually a stamina system. Kirby said stamina would be a lot like power usage. Then Scavenger said, nah, it affects something entirely different.
Yeah, stamina is a very different concept.
He says it affects your running and weapon usage, or
Yeah.
just how often you can punch and
Which
kick.
is more of a Skyrim-esque thing, which I don't like Skyrim, but I think stamina systems are alright.
Well, I'm surprised you didn't make a comparison to like Breath of the Wild.
Well,
which
there's a
also
very
has, like,
big
a heavy
difference for that
sense.
because like
Well, it also depends on
the way
how
he
it
describes
works.
it is very much like Skyrim, where it's like, this is how much I can carry on my back. This is how long I can run. And like Breath of the Wild has that too, where it's like, this is how long I can run and climb. But like, you can carry as many weapons as you have slots for, which you upgrade by doing the Koroks. But stamina is an interesting system that really depends on what you're combining with it. I feel like having stamina and even like mana, having it be like your physical ability and your magical ability is a fairly good system. And if not, then at least having a magical system. But like, I don't feel like it should be hard numbers of how many abilities you have. And like, I feel like only a few things can really get away with it. With probably maybe the only example that I can think of off the top of my head being Final Fantasy, with a lot of its older games, where it's like you have this many amounts or this many level 1 spells and level 2 spells, and it's like D&D in that sense too. But like with Final Fantasy, you have like items that can restore that, so it works out in the end. Whereas if it's a hard number like power usage and you can't restore it, which there is something I want to try with that, and you're probably not gonna.
I'm not gonna let it. Yeah, I already
But
know.
we're
It's
gonna-
a hard
We're
limit.
gonna try it.
You can try.
I will say this. I have 3 more
But,
left.
like,
Do you
I
mind if
don't-
I say my 3 more before you head out?
Okay, yeah, and I'm gonna have to reach out.
It's sort of silly to have a hard limit that can't be restored.
Not really. You only have an hour to play. It's not that big.
So my thing with education, it's describe your ideal education scenario, then roll a d20 to decide how similar or opposite your description to your description, your education previous to your starting point results. So the reason I put it like that is because like if you say I've already got like a doctorate and I'm already like in this field and I'm already doing stuff with it, if you roll like really close to that, like if that's your 20, then like your 18 and your 19 might be like, well, you're still in school. Like you have that degree, like you're going toward it, but like you're not quite there yet. And then like if you roll really low, then you're like, you can still choose that degree if you want to, but you're like gonna have to start from day one. So.
But I still think you can do a scalar thing where it's like, have that range of poor, big, middle, and rich, because that's actually somewhat accurate to real life. And have it be where like you can take hits and like you can still go up and down that scale. Like middle class at 10 is like just plain middle class, but like you can still have it where like going up or down in middle class can still affect how lavish or unlavish it is.
I agree with that. I might do it to like a mix of both. Like I might say you can only take at most 2 from like each one. So like if you really wanted to, you could take 2 from each.
And that's
then,
probably
like,
accurate to how real life works, where it's like sometimes people are like, this is my limit, and then it's like, but this house looks really good, it's only 20,000 more, and it's like, okay, I guess we can make that sacrifice.
Yeah. Well, because I feel like if I just allowed you to take whatever, you'd be like, I can live in a really crappy place, so if I got like a 20, I'll take 19 and just get a 1 on that, but then I'll just add that to everything else and get super high bonuses.
Well, like that's the other thing, I wouldn't just say like take 1 off of something and then add it to everything else. It's like, you take that one and you put it into one thing. It's not,
so it has to be like one specific.
right, it's like equivalent points.
I feel like I like the thing where you could like divide it up, but you can only take at most 2 from each one. So like if you get it, you choose how it goes, but you're sort of like, have you ever played Fallout?
No, I'm aware.
Have you played Fallout?
No, but I feel very similar about it with Skyrim.
I was just gonna say they have like a VAT system thing where like you get what you get, and then like you can move it up or down slightly, like dependent.
I still really like
Just
your
the
base thing, yeah.
But you can absolutely just keep your roll.
Yeah, I mean, true. I think when it comes to like point allocation based systems, I don't like the idea of I had a specific thing in mind and then I roll and then I didn't get it, so I'm gonna like pull my points over.
Yeah.
What I liked in D&D when it came to point allocation is they would give you like a solid number, and then they just let you distribute that number across your different stats. And then because of how solid that number is, it doesn't matter how you distribute it, you're gonna be lacking in something, and you can still, like, you can be balanced if you want, and you can make certain things overpowered, but if you do, you're making other things lower, and you just have to work with it. But I don't like the idea it's like, oh, I rolled and then I take things.
Honestly, with D&D, I would sort of do a cascade effect of, well, like D&D, I don't think they really do like mixed or like random allocation, but like the way I do field allocation is I really prefer pure random for like games with multiple stats, not just like power usage, which is not a good use of just random numbers, but like D&D style stats, random numbers is good because of the fact that it allows you to play your character a bit better based on what those stats do for you. And then a mixed set is also pretty good because it lets you adjust things a little bit to put things just in your favor in a tiny fashion, but not so much that it would completely destroy your character. Pure point allocation, although interesting in the fact that you can make a character of your choosing and specifically play it, doesn't let you have to, doesn't force you into an improv situation where it's like, oh man, normally I'm a really intelligent guy, but like I have like 2 intelligence.
Yeah.
I've got to figure out how to punch my way through things.
I kind of agree with that. I feel like in this point, I wouldn't want to do pure number allocation just because I feel like then it would allow you to make it like perfect. Like,
Which is why I feel like the system that I was saying where it's like you get a random roll and then you adjust things a bit is
put
good.
it in certain ways, but limit you.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know. I still kind of like the rule thing. As far as continuing for job, description of your ideal starting job, then roll a d20 to decide on how similar or opposite your description is to your starting job is previous to your starting point. So
And I also feel like certain roles affect other roles. Like for example, if you're like a doctor and you have a doctorate,
Mhm.
if you're not close to your doctorate, you're not going to be close to your doctor. Like, if with how all these things are being rolled,
Right.
you need to have it set off in certain sections where, like, this is the home section where you choose your neighborhood and your house and your car.
Mhm.
Or, it's weird because job also impacts things.
And I
Matt's
get
saying
that.
if
I
you're
get
a
that.
doctor with a doctorate,
I mean,
but
why
I
wouldn't
live
you
in
be
the
a
slums and I live in the...
I mean, you can
because it's
still choose to live in the
interesting.
slums.
Yeah.
But, like, alternatively, if you're a cashier, you're not going to have a rich, lavish house more likely than not.
But
My
that
whole
would be-
thing would be like it would have to be sort of an improvisational thing. Like if you were a doctor that was really poor and lived in a like there would have to be a reason for it. Like maybe you don't have a medical license at this time. Like maybe you're like a freelance doctor. Maybe you work for like
Which
criminals.
isn't
Like
very
I don't,
illegal,
yeah.
But,
no,
like, you can't make the
exactly.
counter argument for a cashier.
Maybe
What?
you're like an
I'm
extremely
a
famous
cashier
cashier.
at
like,
Richie Rich's house, and I get
yeah.
That's
really.
not how cashiers work.
What do you mean? Richie Rich comes to his closet, and his parents make him pay his allowance to access his closet. And he's like, "Hey, here's a tip," and he hands you like $1 million bill. And you're like, "Thanks, Richie."
This is still steeped in a certain level of reality.
Richie Rich is a relatively realistic thing. He's just rich as fuck.
Just
That's his
Tony
whole
Stark's
character.
house, like, here's an
Tony
Iron Man
Rich.
suit. Experience. Everyone starts out new, in quotes, in their first week to their current position in life, having to start building relationships and history instead of having any founded before the start of the gameplay. So, like, basically, if there's something that wouldn't make sense for you to be brand new, you're in your first week. But for most things, like, people, like, if you have a boss in your job, like, they'll know you to the extent that, like, oh, we met during the interview process or whatever. But it's like your first week and we're still seeing how things are working out. Or like you just transferred here or whatever. And like similar things to like where you live. Like, oh, I'm your new neighbor or whatever.
Oh, I'm gonna read the chat real quick, and then I actually have to dip.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's see. Dun 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 dun. Holy fuck. Dun 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 dun. So Kirby said like Dark Souls. Then Scavenger said I don't play those games, so I don't know.
Well, Dark Souls is a different beast altogether.
He's talking about with the stamina thing or whatever. But I see, like, it's a more desperate thing. Scavenger said, but sure, make it if you want. Kirby said sprinting and attacking drains a stamina bar. And then Scavenger said, make the comparison that is. And then he said, oh then. And then he said, yeah. And then Kirby said, fuck, it moved in a weird way. I have no idea where the next thing was. Okay, Kirby said, and then if you stop attacking and sprinting for a second, the stamina bar will refill. And then Scavenger said, yeah. He says, is a system that uses only one type of die better? I feel like it's much simpler for the player to understand.
But the
Kirby
problem
said-
becomes that then you can't specify things like damage scaling in a feasible way.
I mean, it's not very hard. You can do stuff where it's like, in these situations, the way that your die roll is taken isn't straight. Like, your die
I mean, you
roll may
can
be
put like
put-
flat modifiers on things being like, oh, you're punching someone, do a d20 and then take away like 10 damage. And
depending on how high it goes. Because, I mean, if you rolled a 10, it'd be like, you punched him for nothing. You know, like, little things like that are not hard.
But like it's much easier just to have it as a separate dice that's more accurate to what you're doing, rather than having to figure out, oh,
It's
because-
not even a hard figure.
but it's something where it's like you're putting a lot more range into things, especially if like, for example, you're not a very strong person, but you suddenly get like 20 on a punch dice and you take 10 away and you're doing 10 damage on a punch. It's like, you don't punch like that if you're skinny like me.
You may have, like, a character-based modifier depending on how the game works.
I will say, one interesting thing I was thinking about adding, how would you guys feel about like a similar role thing but for like background? Like that you describe a background
Yes.
but then like
You should
how
have
good-
that.
Yeah.
I agree.
Because then it could like throw you a loop, like, oh, you're this really like smart person and you have like all this money and stuff like that, but you're like completely insane and you do things out of nowhere.
Now
That's
the
just like fuck
only
your
thing with
character.
that is that I don't necessarily think it should affect our morals.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, well, you
But
would.
if you're like insane,
It's just where you
something-
came from.
Right. Like it's things that have affected you in the past that like will affect you now, but like you would still.
I feel like
develop
that's
your
more of a-
morals.
player-by-player basis thing, not something you should roll for.
Well, I mean, you can behave however way you want, but
Well,
your
not
background could be like, you were
necessarily,
born on the
theoretically-
streets.
Yeah.
But theoretically, if you are an insane person in your past, you're gonna have relative insanity in the present day.
Well, he's
Right.
not doing like sanity rolls. It's background. It's like
But
where
like,
you came
that's
from,
what
how
we're
you
saying
were
is
raised.
that like,
Right.
if you, like for example, if you say you're a sane individual, then
Who would say that?
Well, but that's the thing. I think,
My
I think
background is I'm not crazy.
I think the thing with like the mental health stuff was like that it would be something that would like affect you sometimes. Like all of a sudden you'd be like, oh, this guy comes up and is like screaming at you, and you like freak out, but really that person doesn't exist. And it's like you can still react to that in whatever way you want, but it's like something new that's added because of your background.
like I still
That makes
feel
it
like
sound weird because
Yeah, I
it's
still
like,
feel like it should be
remember,
player
you're crazy. What?
I still feel like it should be a player developed thing and not tied to a role itself.
I feel like sanity shouldn't be the thing, but background is a perfectly fine thing, just like how you were raised and where you came from.
But then does that really come into effect?
Yes.
No.
Niggas from your past can be like, yo, I remember you
But
used to
we
live on
don't
like
know
3rd
them.
Street, and you're like, but I wasn't never a gangbanger. It's like everyone on 3rd Street was a gangbanger. It's like, not
But
me. I went
that's
to
the
school.
thing, you're
and-
pulling people from the past and they might
But that's not hard.
But like that's the thing though, is that like the player won't have that connection. And if the player doesn't have that connection, they're not gonna be invested in that thing. They're invested in what they're currently doing, the people that they're making friends with currently.
But that's just real life in general. Someone you don't know could be like, I recognize you, blah, 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 blah. And then you're just dealing with it at the time. You can always tell them to fuck off. It's just like,
Yeah,
it's
but
life.
the player's not gonna know them, so they're gonna be faking it the entire time.
No, that's what I'm saying. You don't have to know them in the game. They recognize you. You've never met this nigga in your life.
But yet that's gonna be the only scenario that happens if you pull people from the past.
There's nothing wrong with it. That's like an everyday
mean,
thing, to be honest.
If you were going to do a background thing, no matter whether you decide to do the, I guess whatever spectrum you would decide to put background under, it would be interesting because then you could do a thing where like everyone technically starts off waking up like in the hospital, like from a coma or something like that, and then it's like because you wouldn't know until you
like
run
if you
into
start with
those people,
amnesia,
and
that's
then
a
you
bit
like start.
different because then it
Yeah.
becomes a matter of figuring out your life story.
Yeah, well yeah.
But that's pushing a amnesia plot on your characters.
That actually sounds fine based on how your character death system works.
Mm-hmm.
It's because it's actually the same thing. You wake
Yeah.
up and you're like, oh, all this shit. Kirby said, I would like multiple dice based on possible damage something can deal. Scavenger said, aight. And then Kirby said, like, how a bullet can deal more damage than the baseball bat.
Exactly.
Scavenger
or like how the
said-
sun would actually burn you to a crisp instantly. Cough, cough, original Jank Heroes, cough, cough.
Scavenger said, this game is like the game of life, but on crack and roids. I agree.
No, yeah.
Scavenger said, ooh, that sounds dope, Kirby. Then Kirby said, remember how a massive blast from a black hole just dealt 1 damage? That was beautiful. Scavenger said, I'm going to use that in the mechanics. Kirby said, black hole. Then he said, his face was on screen. Senpai has been seen. Then Scavenger said, we just saw Mr. Hand. Senpai.
Oh, it's not
Then
me.
Kirby
Oh, it's
That was
said,
an illusion.
then Kirby said, now Winslow has been on screen.
I'm not a mythical creature.
Sanity
You
is a
see me,
stat
guys.
in the game Don't Starve. Then he said also, demonetization for saying gangbang. But anyways, thank you all for watching. If you like this video, make sure to like this video, favorite, comment, subscribe, and ring that bell so you're notified whenever we do these live streams. This has been another theory and discussion video. Thank you all for
Gotta
watching,
change
and
the
have a
name of
wonderful
this
day.
video, Jeff.
This is your host, your friend, your boy, already did. Jet Black, the one and only, here with,
A person who's now making a game. Check out my game.
and
And a person with a game that's already better than what we've been playing this entire time.
And then Kirby said, Scavenger said, but you are Mr. Hand. And then Kirby said, no, that was totally him. He's not a myth no more. Scavenger said, Mr. Hand, the mythological friend of Jet.
Myth
Logging out. Peace.